I he vist que ho tenies encès.
Sí.
He pensat, deuen estar provant vols que...
A l'últim moment m'han dit que volien fer l'streaming en anglès, saps?
Ja, és que a mi també m'estranyava perquè dic... He pensat, l'streaming en català m'estranya perquè és poc... Ja ho tens, no?
Sí, ja està.
Apau?
Pots apagar.
Well, I would like to welcome to the presentation of the 7th report of GUNi, the Global University Network for Innovation. GUNi is an international network that was created in 1999 in the framework of UNESCO Chairs Program. It is supported by the UNESCO and the Catalan Association of Public Universities, ACUP, where you can find the Secretariat and the Presidency. Today we are very happy because we are presenting this report. It's been 2 years long working on it, researching on how humanities can collaborate with science and technology in the higher education. First of all, I would like to thank to all of you who have come today, this morning, to listen to all the results and debates and everything that we have to say about this topic. But also, I would like to congratulate the organizers because it's been a really hard work to do. And I would like to thank especially José María Vilalta, Victoria Gomez, Marta Cayetano, and Alicia Betts, because they were the ones who trusted in me. I'm Irene Lapuente, I come from La Mandarina de Newton, and we work on hybridization of science, technology, design, and arts. So I'm very happy to be here to share with you all these comments, all these debate, discussions, and results from a 2 years work, hard work on how humanities can help science and technology. Today's event is going to have 5 parts. We are going to start with an introduction, an opening. After that, we'll have the talk from Rob Bremen. He will talk about many things, but also not just knowledge, but stupidity. And then José María Vilalta will present the report, the main questions and clues that came out from all this research. Then we'll have a debate with all the people who were in the editorial team. And after that, we'll have a closing speech from some of the members that they are involved in all this work and all this initiative. And finally, at the end, we'll have some cava to say cheers, to congratulate that we are here trying to improve higher education, to improve universities and therefore societies. So wait until the end, because you will get the report on paper and you will get this cava to celebrate together that we are having a really interesting day wondering about universities. So let's start. That was just my short presentation, because we want to go on and know all these things that they've been reflecting, and we want to hear everything about it. So let's start introducing the first panel. First person who would talk is Joan Elias. He's the president of GUNi, the Global University Network for Innovation, and ACUP, Associació Catalana d'Universitats Públiques, and he's also professor of mathematics at the Barcelona University. So please, Joan, if you would like to start. Thank you very much. I ask a big applause.
Thank you very much. You missed to say that I'm the rector of the University of Barcelona. This is the main. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as a president of the Global University Network for Innovation, it's a pleasure to be with you today at the official presentation of the 7th Higher Education in the World report, here at this beautiful and inspiring Caixa Forum. As you know, 220 institutions from 80 countries compose GUNi today. Universities, UNESCO chairs, and research centers on higher education policy and management. Our mission is to strengthen the role of higher education, contributing to the improvement of the policies of higher education across the world, under a vision of public service, relevance and social responsibility. Al llarg de la seva curta
Throughout its short yet intensive life, GUNi has consolidated as one of the world's global networks when it comes to the analysis and debate around higher education in the world. As you know, one of the main research lines has to do with publishing every couple of years a global report on which an emerging topic is thoroughly assessed. In today's edition, we believe that an in-depth research had to be carried out on the current state of humanities in higher education, and also around the area of the interaction between science and humanities, and the result is presented today. More than 130 experts around the world has been discussing on the topic for the last 2 years and have also assessed the cross-cutting elements that combine humanities and science. Today we live in a world which is marked by deep technological and social disruptions and changes, so it's more timely than ever to reflect from universities on topics such as sustainability, democracy, and as Professor Marta Nussbaum says in her book, Not for Profit, Why Democracy Needs Humanities, youth, she says, youth around the world, in any country, in any democratic country, have to be able to participate in governance, and governance requires of information on key topics that we all have to decide upon as voters or civil servants. All modern democracies are societies in which its members do not agree on topics such as religion, ethnic origin, social class, gender, sexuality. Voters in democratic societies have to choose on topics which are relevant for different people. And she says also a way to assess any educational program has to do with asking ourselves, how are we preparing our youth to live and to socially and politically organize such a diverse world? Without the support of well-educated citizens, democracies will not persevere, democracies will not last. So critical thinking is key in order to preserve a lively democracy. Marta Nussbaum's quote, I believe, is more timely than ever in today's world, where inequalities are on the rise, there are more and more contradictions, and dangerous populist and fascist movements, as probably our dear Professor Rob Riemann will be referring to. So from this perspective, higher education institutions have to be brave and have to accept our role to become discussion for us in order to promote scientific, humanistic, and social knowledge. I would like to conclude my address by thanking all the organizations and different professionals that have made this report possible. The Caixa, the Catalan government, the Ministry for Education and Higher and Universities of Spain, the Editorial Committee, Marina Garces, David Bueno, the Advisory Board of ACUP, and of course the GUNi for their tireless effort. The 130 authors also, I would like to thank them for their contributions. I would like to thank UNESCO for trusting in our work, for the support of higher education. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much. We will use both Catalan and English in this presentation, in this session. We have started using English. This is an international meeting, but we will also have the chance to speak in Catalan or in Spanish in some of the presentations. The next speaker, Àngel Font, is the corporate director for research of La Caixa. Probably he will be speaking in Catalan, if I am not mistaken, and he will be telling us a little bit more about the context. Thank you. The floor is yours, Àngel Font. I can speak in Catalan or in English, as you wish. Hello and good morning, one and all. Good morning. Buenos días.
Caixa Forum, welcome to one of the premises of La Caixa that we are more proud about. We are very glad I'm very glad to be here supporting this presentation because this report is really relevant for the society and is really relevant for us. As you probably know, I will change to Catalan in a minute. Our foundation has a strong commitment on science and research. 20% of our budget is allocated on that field, not only to just scientific and technological issues, but also on social sciences and humanities. And m'agradaria
I would like to share a short anecdote with you, which is related to why humanities are relevant for Fundació La Caixa. This anecdote dates back to the early 20th century, or even at the end of the 19th century, when Francesc Moragas, the founder of La Caixa, felt the need to get to know more about the working class in Catalonia. He wanted to know how this working class was composed. He wanted to learn more about qualitative and quantitative elements of what he described as the working class of Catalonia, and the research was published in a magazine. Back then, I would like to remind you that he was an ethics professor, and humanities were very important for him. And 3 years after the publishing of the report, La Caixa was founded. It was the first private pension fund in the Spanish state, led by the working class. So, of course, social sciences, humanities, and the combination between both are relevant, have been relevant to transform today's society and to get where we are. And that's how we approach humanities, and that's why it's very important for us to be here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Angel Font. In fact, this is part of the richness we're all referring to. Probably it will be a recurrent topic also in Rob Rimmond's presentation. Linguistic diversity is extremely rich in Europe and in Spain, so thanks for that. The next presentation will be by Francesc Padró, the director of the ISEALC, UNESCO. The floor is yours, sir.
Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today. If I'm not mistaken, GUNi is celebrating the 20th anniversary this year, so I'm very glad to congratulate you for all the efforts made. On behalf of UNESCO, I just wanted to reiterate, first of all, our support to networks like GUNi. I believe that in the area of higher education, no one has surpassed what GUNi has been doing so far. Let me just mention the excellent report that you produced, I think, 2 years ago, on the contribution of higher education to the Sustainable Development Goals. And now, I mean, this impressive report on the synergies between science, technology, and humanities. I'm glad also to be here because this is my country. This is the first time I'm able to speak on behalf of UNESCO in my own country, so it's really a pleasure to be here for that reason as well. Now, I'm directing the UNESCO International Institute for Higher Education, now located in Caracas, Venezuela, a very challenging environment. But I have the mandate to contribute to the development of this institute as to become the only specialized institute in the United Nations system to deal with higher education in the world. That means that we have a very strong period of time in front of us, 2 years of really, really hard work. Now, I hope that in this vision, we can be joined by successful networks as GUNi. So thank you very much for that as well. Now let me switch to my own mother tongue, Catalan. Bé, voldria...
So, first of all, I would like to underline some key points which I believe to be extremely important milestones that are somehow framed in the report. First of all, I would like to share a reflection from a critical perspective that I believe should always define the way we approach higher education issues from UNESCO. So the first question that comes to my mind is, how did we get to a situation where humanities are a big question mark, in the sense that they are sometimes not considered important? in personal development. And I would like to recall some of the analysis that we have carried out from UNESCO that remind us that at the end of the day, we are marginalizing humanities at the higher education level. And this is the result of several elements that happen within universities. Of course, we could all refer to the enormous outside pressure that universities face to respond to an idea of a knowledge society based on science and technology. It's also true that universities have to respond to a higher demand of some studies, undermining others. And I would like to summarize it by saying something that I used to hear when I was a child. I remember when I was a child, so that means that was a long time ago, more than 50 years ago, I used to hear, what is the boy doing? Oh, he's studying in university. What is he studying? Oh, classical philology. And what is he gonna do in the future? Well, probably his uncle will find him a job in La Caixa, in the bank. It's just a joke, but I believe this is quite illustrative of the situation. 50 years ago, having a university degree meant being part of an elite, and there was no problem in finding a job if you hold a BA. And back then, working in La Caixa was prestigious. Today, holding a bachelor's in classical philology somehow puts you in a really bad position to become a director of La Caixa. I believe there are much better skilled profiles in today's world, right? Then there's another important element, which is funding. How are we funding research? Well, humanities are not being funded. 15 days ago, I read a report on a Scopus database. Of course, you all know what a Scopus is because you are from the academic background, but well, let me just say that it's one of the most consulted databases, and it's clear that in the last 15 years, the contribution of papers in humanities is decreasing. Why? Mainly because in the last 15 years, the contribution of research from countries such as China and India extremely focused on science and technology with no reference to humanities has wiped out humanities from Scopus. There are very little entries in humanities in percentage, right? But as good academic members, I believe we should remember that we have taken internal decisions that have neglected humanities. At the end of the day, universities, sometimes with certain interferences from governments, are the only decisions on how our training programs look like, on how we put together the departments and the different positions that we open. And I believe that I am entitled to say here that I am not sure whether we should consider ourselves hypocritical or believe that we are schizophrenic, right? Because sometimes we name and shame what's going on and we just consider that we are in a terrible situation, but perhaps it's our own blame, right? But there's a certain amount of things that we can still do, and the first thing that we could do probably has to do with the configuration of higher education, and more importantly, of secondary education, because in some countries in Europe, having a specialization in humanities in the secondary education is an open door to a medicine faculty. It's still the case in some parts of the world, not here. The fact that it doesn't happen here doesn't mean that it's not possible. I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying that it happens. And what I'm trying to convey here is that the fact that classical humanities are taught in many countries, this is a fact. And there are many, many countries in the world that are not thinking about changing this situation. So, secondly, we could also think about a configuration of our training curriculum, especially in the pre-BA or the Bachelor +2, Bachelor +3, as it says in some countries, that allow pupils to postpone their decisions on the specialization that somehow theaters to the university trainings. This would allow more ample training flows, or This would allow us to have majors and minors, and a specialization in a specific discipline, and at the same time, free time to reflect about what we're interested in science, in technology. Sometimes we take early decisions as students in today's world. Last, I would like to remember a fourth point, which is being spotted by some Asian universities, in some Asian countries and also in some Asian universities. They are thinking about a long-lasting university credit. Probably we should consider that everyone is entitled to a certain amount of years of university training, because probably you have friends like myself that after a long career in economy, in poetry, in science, in technology, when they have a certain professional maturity and when they are not, they don't have children in charge, all of a sudden they consider that they want to study humanities because they want to go back to a meaningful life. And I believe that this whole idea of the universal university credit is a good one and can offer us a future perspective. And I would like to end by referring to an article that I read a week ago, which made me think about the topic we're discussing today. Humanities are, at the end of the day, helping us reflect about human realities, but we cannot consider them to be just the tip of the iceberg. No, they are an extremely serious discipline because they refer to humanity. Once again, thank you very much for being here and for inviting me. Thank you, and congratulations for the report.
Well, thank you for all the welcoming talks. Now we'll have the opportunity to enjoy the conference by Rob Bremen, How to Humanize Humans in an Inhuman Age. He's one of Europe's leading intellectuals. He's the founder of Nexus Institute. He's a writer, and his books have been translated in more than 23 languages. He writes about capitalism, diversity, values, totalitarianism, and, as I said, stupidity. So, Rob Bremen, How to Humanize Humans in an Inhuman Age. Please. Big applause.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Indeed, stupidity is one of those unacknowledged evils of our time. Or if we want to put it in a more nice way, ignorance. And in this respect, the work of GUNi is more important than ever, I guess. To take care for higher education or education in general. I also appreciate the fact that they want to give the floor to somebody who is not part of the world of higher education, as I'm not working at the university. In fact, I never worked at the university, but I'm very much interested in the work of universities. Okay, so the correct title of my lecture is Being Human in an Inhuman Age. Now, any reflection on being human in an inhuman age has to start with an understanding of our human condition. What is human? What is inhuman? Now, obviously, science nor technology can give a meaningful answer to these fundamental questions, as this knowledge and truth are beyond their reach. The humanities, art and literature, however, can. They can show us a picture that will help us to understand what our human condition is all about. Caput, a masterwork published in 1944, which almost instantly became a classic in the world of literature, as it tells so brilliantly the gripping chronology of Europe's decay and cruel self-destruction during a Second World War, gives us that picture of a human condition. But the picture is bleak, and it is as bleak as it is truthful. The author, the Italian diplomat, war correspondent and writer Cuccio Malaparte, was close to Mussolini's fascist movement in the beginning. Yet in 1931, Malaparte was imprisoned by Mussolini because he had become publicly too critical. Not long after, he was released again because of his friendship to the son-in-law of Mussolini. And although later in life he became a supporter of the Italian Communist Party, Malaparte was basically all his life a nonconformist, maybe even an anarchist, and a writer. And as a writer, just like his colleague in Soviet Russia, Vasily Grossman, he was a real truth teller. In Kaput, he devotes a chapter to a dinner party he attended by the end of January 1942, which was organized by Dr. Hans Frank, the Governor General of Poland on behalf of the Führer in the Third Reich. The guest of honor was the Reichsführer of the SS, Heinrich Himmler. The dinner party takes place in the Wawelkastel in Krakow, in Poland, not only one of Europe's cultural capitals, but also just 70 kilometers outside a new concentrationslager called Auschwitz. Himmler happens to be in town, as he just have had an inspection of Auschwitz because of the decisions taken only a few weeks ago at the top-secret Wannsee conference concerning the necessity of the Endlösung, the final solution on how to annihilate the Jewish people as soon and as effective as possible. So just before the dinner starts, Himmler has informed strictly confidential Dr. Frank about these decisions and that the Führer has assigned the Governor General to oversee that there will be a perfect execution of that the holy mission of the Third Reich will be accomplished, the total destruction of the Jewish people. Dinner starts and Malaparte is seated next to Frau Brigitte Frank. Dr. Hans Frank, being the host, welcomes everybody, brings a toast to the guest, and especially the guest of honor, Himmler, and he opens the conversation. At a certain moment he addresses Malaparte, who is impressed by Frank's fluency in Italian. He knew that Dr. Frank had studied in Rome, but still, his eloquence in Italian was almost better than that of the average Italian. And not only that, not only his command on the language is impressive, but even more his knowledge of Italian art, literature and culture. With great ease based on a true and profound knowledge, he speaks about Plato, Marsilio Ficino, Donatello, Sandro Botticelli. And next to his erudition, it turns out that he's also a very gifted pianist, with a passion for the works of Schumann, Brahms and Chopin. And Malaparte finds it remarkable that in the presence of Heinrich Himmler, who's one of the people closest to the Führer, Dr. Frank has no problem to argue that he considers Chopin a much greater composer than Wagner. Frau Brigitte Frank, so proud of her husband, whispers in the ear of Malaparte that her husband is not only a truly great Governor General, but he's also a true scholar and a great artist. Yes, so she tells him, when my husband, with all the stress of his big responsibilities, has to retreat to his study, there he will sit behind his piano and will play some of the works of his favorite composers to find the inspiration, to find the best and most efficient means to fulfill the orders of the Führer. Now, Dr. Frank, as a good host, could have guessed what his wife was telling Malaparte, and so he turns to Malaparte and he tells him that, I'm sure that you will agree with me that the Germans, the country of Goethe and Schiller, Bach and Beethoven, Kant and Hegel, that the Germans, just like our Italians and Amici, are a truly civilized people. But those Jews, horrible, they are like pigs, a sickly race, completely in decline. All of them degenerates, davvero. There is no doubt, he continues to explain, that the Jews must be eradicated. The world has to become Judenrein. But he wants everybody to know that he strongly disapproves about what happened recently in Romania, where 7,000 Jews were slaughtered. It's scandaloso. That is so uncivilized, such a bloodbath. The Romanian people are not civilized either. And with a loud voice, to make sure that Himmler, who is seated on the other head of the table, will hear him as well. He says, Deutschland is a country with a high civilization, and our Führer is horrified by barbaric means. We Germans, we always follow a method and reason in everything, never animal instincts. We do everything scientifically, if necessary, and only if necessary. We do the work of a surgeon, but never that of a butcher. Have you ever seen a Jewish bloodbath in the streets of Germany, amico malaparte? Of course not. And with a smile, looking at Himmler, he says, believe me, liebe Freunde, in not too long, there won't be a single Jew left in Europe. Heil Hitler. Now, the prediction of Dr. Frank was correct. 3 years later, the Jews in Europe were annihilated, not least because of the effectiveness of his own decisions. When on October 1946, at the Nuremberg trial, Frank was sentenced to death, Dr. Frank was still convinced about his own innocence, as he only had devoted his life to the preservation of culture and protecting civilization against all the uncivilized elements. Now, what is it that this episode in our very recent history tells us about the human condition, what it means to be human, inhuman, and what kind of age we live in? Auschwitz is now a synonym for the epitome of inhumanity. The whole objective of this hell on earth was to deprive human beings of their own human dignity, to mutilate, annihilate, and then use their physical remains to fabricate soap. For the Nazis, the Jews were only Untermenschen, subhumans, and therefore to be destroyed. But how human were the perpetrators? How human this well-educated, erudite and musical Dr. Hans Frank? Without any doubt, he considered himself belonging to the Übermenschen. But can we possibly consider a man who was active in the destruction of millions of people to be the epitome of what it means to be human? One of the lessons learned from this history, a lesson with an enormous impact on our ideal of education now, is that apparently the humanities do not humanize. Because Dr. Frank was certainly not the only very well-educated intellectual and artist in the 20th century who became accomplice to the horrors and genocides of totalitarian regimes. The list is long, the list is too long. However, what is largely ignored, if not forgotten, is the complicity of science and technology in the same horrors. Dr. Frank was telling the truth when he argued that the Nazis could be proud of their scientific method and technology to execute their genocide. Engineers had constructed and built the gas chambers. Chemists fabricated the deadly poison Cyclone B gas. Mathematicians calculated the schedules for the train transportations to the death camps. Medical doctors used Jewish women for their experiments to breed a superior race, and without any consideration, they mutilated their bodies before they destroyed them. This destruction, on an unprecedented scale of millions of people, was done with the mindset of a technocratic rationalism. The humanities may not humanize, but neither do science or technology. Again, what does this mean for our question, how to be human in an inhuman age? Now, perhaps we could first explore the notion of an inhuman age, the idea that our societies are becoming less and less human. It was the First World War that gave birth to a growing sense of living in an inhuman age. When that war had ended in 1919, many memoirs and diaries of that time testified that the whole generation had woke up out of their intellectual sleep and suddenly realized that the world had changed drastically. Before the war, the intellectual elites still believed in the power of their own bourgeois culture, with books and theatre and a kind of shared moral values. After the war, they realized that their culture had gone, that they have come to live in a technological era. The machine man becomes a frequently used term, and they have no idea how the world ought to go on from there. The French philosopher and poet Paul Valéry summarized the situation in just one sentence in April 1919. I quote, "We later civilizations, we too now know that we are mortal." Mortal because the pillars of Europe's civilization, its moral and spiritual values had collapsed, and what was once presented as the face of its civilization, Europe's culture and education, turned out to be nothing more than a decoration and a facade. In the same text, Valéry continues with the following observations, I quote, "The military crisis may be over, the economic crisis is still with us in all its force, but the intellectual crisis, being more subtle because it assumes the most deceptive appearances, will hardly allow us to grasp its true extent. The illusion of a European culture has been lost, and knowledge has been proved impotent to save anything. Science is morally wounded in its moral ambitions and, as it were, put to shame by the cruelty of its applications. Idealism is barely surviving, deeply stricken, and called to account for its dreams. Realism is hopeless, beaten, rooted by its own crimes and errors. Greed and abstinence are equally flouted. Faiths are confused in their aim cross against cross, and even the skeptics, confounded by the sudden, violent and moving events, are no longer masters of the motions of their thoughts." End of quote. Only a few years later, while he was working on his epic novel, The Man Without Qualities, Robert Musil wrote the following note, I quote, "Each era must have a guideline, a raison d'être, a balance between theory and ethics, God, etc. And yet, the age of empiricism failed." Now, Musil, who was trained as an engineer and originally intended to be an engineer, had serious doubts if science and technology would ever be able to reverse that guidance, those ethics which would create a more humane world and restore a broken civilization. Musil was not alone with his skepticism. At the same time, another engineer who had become fascinated by mathematics and logic, and who, by the way, also happened to live in Vienna, Ludwig Wittgenstein, with the experience of the war and after long and hard thinking, he had come to the conclusion that it is simply impossible to expect that science and technology could ever present us the ethics we have to protect human dignity and the well-being of humanity. When in August 1914 the war broke out, Wittgenstein was in the midst of writing his dissertation on the nature of logic. Yet in June 1916, in the front line and under fire, it was as if one big existential question exploded in his mind, and he wrote it down in his notebook. I quote, "What do I know about God and the purpose of life?" And then he wrote down the following remarks, I quote, "I know that this world exists, that I'm placed in it like my eye in its visual field, that something about it is problematic, which we call its meaning, that good and evil are somehow connected with the meaning of the world." End of quote. The war went on, and he continued to think not only about the nature of logic, but also about the nature of ethics, both being conditions of the world. At the end of the war, with the Habsburg Empire already collapsing, Wittgenstein was transported to the Italian front, where he was captured and imprisoned in a camp. There he finished his dissertation, which he entitled Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. Now, this book became the smallest, one of the most discussed and influential books of philosophy in the 20th century. Now, the whole purpose of this work is to define what can be put in words and what not. Now, this was essential for Wittgenstein because of those frightening questions: what do I know about God and the meaning of life? And what is the knowledge of good and evil? Because if the answer to these questions cannot be put in words, then everything that pretends to do so, religious doctrines, political ideologies, legal systems, are fundamentally a lie, and instead of cultivating ethics, they are corrupting ethics. And next to that, he can only conclude that it is an illusion to think that science will ever be able to answer his questions about ethics, the meaning of life, what is good and what is evil. In his Tractatus he writes, I quote, "We feel that even if all possible scientific questions were answered, the problems of life would still not have been touched at all." And he writes, "The entire modern worldview is based on the illusion that the so-called laws of nature can explain natural phenomena." End of quote. Now, the intuition of Musil and the analysis of Wittgenstein that science nor technology can provide us with an ethics, values and education that would restore a broken civilization was confirmed by Albert Camus after a Second World War. It was March 28, 1946, when Camus takes the floor of the Miller Theatre at Columbia University in New York. The audience was packed. Although there were only 750 seats, more than 1,200 people showed up, most of them students, to listen to this very young French intellectual. He was only 32 years old, but already famous for being an existentialist philosopher who had written that bleak novel L'Étranger, The Stranger, in which he had captured so brilliantly the spirit of his time, which was also the topic of his short speech on the human crisis. And in a straightforward manner, he addressed the American students as follows, I quote, "My generation, born just before First World War, was raised in Europe at the time of the economic crisis of 1929, the war in Ethiopia, the civil war in Spain, the rise of fascism as a mass movement, the triumph of Nazism, the betrayal of the elites. Raised in such a world, what could we believe in? Nothing. The world was absurd. When Hitler conquered our countries and our homes, what values did we have with which we could oppose the Nazis? None, because we no longer had any values at all. If everything that happened was the result of a broken political system, it would have been easy. But the decay, the moral indifference, came from within society. Life had little value, and the facet violence was really no more than a logical consequence. Still, we fought it because it was unbearable. Hitler has disappeared, but the poison of fascism has not. We have lost our human values. Now it is our task, the task of philosophers, to search for and create universal, positive values that can reconcile our pessimistic analysis with the optimism of deeds." End of quote. What Albert Camus, when he spoke these words in New York, didn't know is that a decade before him, before he spoke about the human crisis, there was a brave Jewish philosopher who had already accepted his task, being a philosopher, to address the human crisis he was facing. However, this philosopher also realized that it only makes sense to search for the lost universal moral and spiritual values if one first understands why and how they got lost and we have come to live in this inhuman age. That philosopher is Edmund Husserl, who on the 10th of May 1935 in Vienna will deliver a lecture with as a topic the crisis of philosophy of mind, which he rightly sees as the crisis of man and European culture in particular. Fascism, 1935, is on the rise everywhere in Europe. Husserl, being a Jew, is no longer allowed to teach at his university in Nazi Germany. He's 76 years old. He lives isolated in exile. He is sick. Already 3 years after this lecture he will die, and he is often depressed. But what gives this old man strength is his deeply felt urge to warn for the fact that the tide of barbarism which is overflowing Europe is profoundly connected to a scientific way of thinking that had deeply gone wrong. And people have to understand that, now more than ever, to prevent the worst. So he starts his lecture with an obvious fact. Europe, he says, is sick. So why is there no medicine? Why are the humanities? Why is philosophy not providing that medicine? Now our culture is mortally ill. Shame on Europe, Husserl says. Shame on Europe, as it is the birthplace of philosophy. Philosophy, the universal science of the world as a whole, the universal unity of all being. Humanity, with its double nature of animal and spiritual, is a never-finished creature as its destiny lies in its infinity, in the eternal spiritual values which, in a never-ending quest, every human being, with his soul and mind, should try to make his own. The purpose of philosophy, Husserl explains, is to elevate people to that metaphysical truth, these metaphysical ideas and values, and in this process transforms us into a radically new humanity made capable for an absolute responsibility to itself and all living beings. In short, to renew the creation of the world out of its own destruction. But much to his regret, Husserl can only conclude that philosophy has gone wrong as well, and that this European crisis of the mind has its roots in a mistaken rationalism. The rationalism of a radical enlightenment is an aberration. It not only produced academics lost in theory, isolated from the world and full of intellectual snobbiness, much worse, the rationalistic paradigm of the radical enlightenment is disconnected, is no longer our bridge to that transcendental reason with Socrates, the Stoa, St. John the Evangelist, and Spinoza called the Logos. And it is because of this disconnection, Husserl explains, we are now left with the dominant rationalism of the science of nature, which is reduced to an anti-metaphysics, a naturalism, an objectivism, deprived of any universal spiritual meaning, deprived of any language with the power to create and to give life. Mankind has become homeless in their relations to Mother Nature and themselves, as it has lost its own soul. What is left is a society full of boredom and sensationalism because of the meaninglessness it cultivates, a society full of ignorance because of the mindlessness it cultivates, and full of conformism because of the usefulness it cultivates. And the poetic voice has been silent and replaced by academic jargon, economic numbers, slogans, and now we could add Twitter. Husserl ends his lecture in 1935 with the conclusion that this cultural crisis can only end two ways. Or Europe will fall into a violent barbarism that hates the human spirit, or there will be a rebirth of Europe through a rediscovery of the origins of a humanistic philosophy. He adds, meine Damen und Herren, our greatest danger is the current attitude of weariness, boredom, despair, disbelief, as if nothing should or can be done to stop the barbarians inside our Europe. But we must have the courage to fight. So let us be good Europeans, and although I'm an old man, you have to join me in the battle for the rebirth of the human spirit as the pledge of a new civilization, for the spirit alone is immortal. But Husserl, ladies and gentlemen, was a lonely voice. Instead of having the courage to join the philosopher in his fight against the rising barbarism, rooted in an empty rationalism, violent nationalism, and a semi-religious political irrationalism, most of his academic colleagues preferred to stay silent, or, as his former student Martin Heidegger did, to collaborate openly with the Nazis. So barbarism came with a power that even Husserl could not have imagined. And after the war, Albert Camus was right. Hitler was gone, but the poison of fascism did not disappear. As he wrote in his novel La Peste, published a year after his speech in New York, fascism is a bacillus that can hide for decades, but eventually it will come back, although most likely disguised in a new form. The return of fascism is happening right now in our time. It is here in Spain, it is in Italy, it's in Hungary, it's in Poland, it's Croatia, it's in France, it's my country, the Netherlands, it's in the USA, it is in Venezuela, it's in Brazil, it's in Turkey, and God knows where else. And those who keep using the term populism are or simply afraid to face the facts, or they are ignorant about what the fascist mindset is. And as George Santayani wisely remarked, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So let us have the courage and wisdom to join the battle of Edmund Husserl against the rise of barbarism in our inhuman age. And a good start would be to make the study of the lecture of Husserl obligatory reading for all students at any institute of higher education, ourselves included. And then with Husserl we will return to the origins of the philosophy that enlightened us about being human, the philosophy of Socrates. Aware that in this universe the human being is the only creature with a double nature, as well of flesh and blood, having instincts, fear, desires and passions, but also endowed with a spirit that makes us conscious of the moral and spiritual values that will give life to life, dignify our human existence and make it worth living. It was Socrates who identified the human soul as the essence of our being. It is due to our soul that we, mortal humans, are connected to what Emerson called the oversoul, Spinoza and Kant, transcendental reason, Philo of Alexandria, the divine mind, St. John the Evangelist, and the classical Greek philosophers, the Logos. Whatever it is called, for all of them it's the locus of the eternal, transcendental moral and spiritual values such as truth, goodness, freedom, love, friendship, compassion, justice and beauty, the values which every individual, every generation, every society should make their own. How? Through education. The education people have to find their own answers about the two key questions which, according to Socrates, every human being and every society has to ask again and again, because without it, a meaningful life and a civilized society cannot exist. Question 1, what is the right way to live? Question 2, what is a good society? And the two questions are interrelated, because if you know the answer to the first, you probably also know the answer to the second. And being moral questions, science and technology are by definition unable to provide an answer. Wittgenstein's argument in his Tractatus is a late echo of what Socrates already argued more than 2 millennia before him. Socrates called his idea of education paideia. Goethe would call it Bildung. Emerson, Whitman and John Henry Newman called it liberal education. Cicero would summarize it, the essence of this educational model, in his Tusculan Disputations as cultura animi philosophia est. The cultivation of the human soul is the quest for wisdom. A quest for wisdom, not information, not data analysis. When Husserl, 2000 years after Cicero, observed, I quote, merely fact-minded sciences make merely fact-minded people who have no clue about the meaning of existence, then that is the ego of Cicero. An indispensable part of paideia, liberal education, to cultivate the human soul through the love of wisdom, is to know the language of the muses, the arts. Because the knowledge of the heart, all our feelings and emotions, which are so often beyond expression, will find their expression and then open up for understanding and communication through poetry, literature, music, the visual arts. Liberal education is an education in the humanities that aims at character formation, becoming human, reminding and helping us to be that person whom we should be so that we can live in truth, create beauty, do justice, give true love, and be compassionate with all our fellow human beings and with planet Earth. It is an education to use reason not just to know the facts, but to gain understanding and meaning. It's an education grounded in a humanistic philosophy that can guide us in our quest of life through self-examination and using l'esprit de finesse, which is Pascal's untranslatable expression for philosophical intuition to detect what has value and what not, what is a virtue and what is a vice, what is true and what is a lie. Now, this is the education Paul Valéry, Musil, Wittgenstein, and Husserl knew we have lost, and of which Albert Camus knew it's the only education that will help us to find again the universal spiritual and moral values we need to overcome the human crisis in our inhuman age. For these thinkers, the humanities, art and culture are not just a decoration or facade as being the object of aestheticism, which has been the case with Dr. Hans Frank and so many other fascists. Not for nothing, both Walter Benjamin and Thomas Mann warned, independent of each other, about the close neighborhood of aestheticism and barbarism. But culture, the high normative culture of the classics, can only be an invitation. Just like love is an invitation. You can never force somebody to love you. Yet, what would your life be if there would be never someone who invites you to love him or her? And the same is true for culture as an incarnation of the Logos. It is about an invitation and the gift of a liberal education to help you to change your life, to have a homecoming to your better self, to make truth and justice a home in this world, and to set you free. The freedom Spinoza had in mind when he wrote his Ethics, the freedom that will elevate us above our animal instincts and our animal nature, redeem us from our worst instincts, ignorance and prejudices, a freedom with which we can develop a critical mind that will protect us against the lies and false premises of the demagogues and fundamentalists. Yet, in the process of centuries, we have lost gradually the spirit of this liberal education. First, because of the seductive power of science of nature, and with it, a phenomenal technological progress. However, as Husserl explained, there is an aberration of a rationalism if it aims at objectivism and utilitarianism, and the human soul, with its quest for meaning in a life so often full of tears, fears, tragedies, and meaninglessness, is forgotten. So when Nietzsche proclaimed the death of God, he didn't say anything new. He just found a powerful expression for a technocratic rationality which excludes moral and spiritual values. But Nietzsche was the first to realize that the consequences would be nihilism and a revaluation of values. That became true in the first half of the 20th century, and it's still very true today. In a real democracy, the democracy that Spinoza fought for, people would be free thanks to a liberal education and the cultivation of moral and spiritual values. But that's not the world in which we live. Our so-called democracies are de facto mass democracies, or more precise, market economies driven by a technocratic rationalism in which people become more and more like machines, passive, unalive, without much feeling. And society adapts itself to the demands of the market economy by being productive, efficient, useful, conforming to a commercial money culture. Education is reduced to being the humble servant of this economy and the mindset of this technocratic rationalism through the promotion of the STEM studies, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The art of creation, which is a form of life, has been replaced by the law for innovation, a fabrication of that material. And due to the decline of values, because the technocratic rationalism excludes intrinsic values, and also due to the growing social pressures of conformism as the only way to make a career in a utilitarian society, people will become obsessed by serving their self-interests. Quality, a spiritual value, is replaced by quantity, and everything and everybody is reduced to and measured by numbers. And obviously, the biggest number are celebrated being the winners. Now, with this lack of intrinsic values and critical minds, the democracies will decay into parliamentarism, ruled by a political class being the perfect mirror of our society, full of ambitions, greed, short-sighted prejudices, profoundly ignorant, having no vision, and hiding their self-interest with lies and slogans. And living in this social jungle, where the growing social inequalities and cultivated ignorance are the breeding ground for resentments, we cannot be surprised about the return of the fascist mindset with its love for demagogues, the politics of lies, hatred, fear, and xenophobia, the cultivation of nationalism, materialism, authoritarianism, and their despise of the life of the mind and care for the human soul. So what's to be done? The new masters of the universe, the innovators of artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence, want us to believe that science and technology, that robots and the machine men will bring us a new civilization. That might be true, but it will be by definition another inhumane civilization, as it will be deprived by all that makes us human. The knowledge of the heart, striving to make eternal values our own in our mortal life, the quest of life for meaning, and make life worth living. Yet, the masters of the universe will tell you that even if you don't like to live in their variation of a brave new world, it will come anyway, so you better accept it. But we don't have to accept this, as much as we don't accept the return of fascism. What we may never forget is that one of the essentials of a humane civilization is the power of saying no. To say no to the lust of killing, to say no to the lust of power and money, to say no to all those instincts and desires that reduce us to animals, to say no to the cultivated stupidity of a commercial culture that reduces us to mindless consumers, to say no to machine age which will turn us or make ourselves slaves or robots. And the other essential of a human civilization, of a humane civilization, is that with the help of a liberal education, we can cultivate our soul, rediscover our common humanity, and have a democracy as the only form of government that gives space to a pluralistic society in which everybody, irrespective of their own individual identity, can live with dignity and in freedom together. When Giuseppe Verdi, the great composer, in a letter in 1870 writes, and became one of his famous quotes, "Torniamo all'antico, sarà un progresso." Let's return to the past, that will be progress. His call was not a longing for nostalgia or conservatism, but a heartfelt call to study and educate ourselves in the classics. Classics because there is a never-ending life and truth in them. Now, Husserl's lecture in 1935, summarizing his philosophy and his battle, was an acceptance of that call. And the same is true for the life and work of one of his very few truly loyal students, the German Jewish philosopher Leo Strauss. His lecture in 1959 on what is liberal education echoes his teachers Husserl, Spinoza, Cicero and Socrates, when he says something which is crucially important for all of us who, against the dominance of the prevalent technocratic rationalism and cultural commercialism, wants to join the fight for the rebirth of the only education that will help to be human at our age more human. So here is what Leo Strauss said, I'll quote and will be my final quote. Liberal education is an education in culture or toward culture. Liberal education is the counterpoison to mass culture, to the corroding effects of mass culture, to its inherent tendency to produce nothing but specialists without spiritual vision and voluptaries without heart. Liberal education is the ladder by which we try to ascend from a mass democracy to democracy as originally meant. Liberal education is the necessary endeavor to found an aristocracy within democratic mass society. Liberal education reminds those members of a mass democracy who have ears to hear of human greatness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, now we have a few minutes. We don't have a long time, but I think we can have some time to ask some questions. I guess you won't say no this time, you will say yes. So if someone has something to add or to ask or would like to say something to Rob Riemann, you can just raise your hand and someone will... There is one question there. I think there is a micro. If you could go over there.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. My name is Guillem Feixas from the University of Barcelona, Faculty of Psychology. I was thinking about these big questions, what is the right way to live, and also the praise of humanities. And I was thinking if it shouldn't be better try to find the synergies between humanities and science. Because if we go with a discourse that humanities are good and science is not so good and will bring us an human civilization with technology, maybe we are losing opportunities. For example, because of health science, we know that, for example, smoking is not good. So if we are compassionate with people who don't want to quit smoking, and we celebrate the importance of smoking from a humanity point of view, or with wine, for example, Kierkegaard said, in vino veritas, right? So we need to find alliances to be really in the sake of human values. It's true that science is not an expert on values, but one of the values of health sciences is survival of life, the persisting of life. So we should try to find alliances. And some of the research on values can be empirical. And so, for example, there are works with people with oncological problems using meaning in life groups to help them, assist them in their spiritual values and in surviving their difficulties. So I think there are a lot of synergies that should be also highlighted.
Well, so listen, my argument is not based as if the humanities or philosophy is good and science is bad. Far from it, but I wanted to explain that, quote unquote, there is an ontological difference, there is a fundamental difference. There are things you cannot expect from science as there are things you cannot expect from the humanities, okay? The humanities cannot give you any clue on how the world of science will work or whatsoever. But it's the only kind of knowledge we have if we are capable to reconnect to those transcendental values, what our ethics are about. And I think it's, I totally agree with all the people I quoted, otherwise I would not have quoted them, that it's a mistake to think that science or technology, Wittgenstein is absolutely right. Even if we have found answer to all these scientific questions, we would not have touched upon the life, because it's beyond their knowledge. Now, then, yes, science wants to extend life, yes, but science also can kill. These things are so. The ethical measure of what we can do and what we cannot do, Wittgenstein went even that far that we cannot even put it in words. It has to be a kind of intuition. An intuition which we can help to develop through the world of culture. Because, when you're capable, to open your heart, because you have a better understanding of what it means to be human, on a psychological level. And with all great respect to people I deeply admire, like Freud and many others, Freud would be the first one to argue that a novel of Dostoevsky or also can help you have a much better understanding of what. So it's not about either or, but my whole premise was that if you want to do this serious, the first thing we have to have is a rebirth. It's a rebirth of that kind of philosophy Husserl and others were working. And that's not happening. And one of the reasons to continue, why is it that one of the problems with the humanities is they killed suicide. And they committed suicide because they accepted the paradigm of Descartes. They want to prove again and again every day, also to get the money, etc., 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 that they are real sciences. But that's not the case. And it should not be the case. I mean, history, literature, nonsense. It's the art of reading, it's the art of interpretation, it's the art of reading life. That's what it is. Now, it's an old debate, but the scientific paradigm is so totally dominant, and it's a utilitarian paradigm, just as the algorithms. Algorithms are based on utilities. And we are dealing with, quote unquote, a political class which only can accept that we spend tax money on the things which are useful, concrete, we can measure it, we can measure it, we can measure it, not having a clue that the real things and a kind of fundamental knowledge to be a human being is not to be measured. It's a complete nonsense. So it's the decline of the humanities, and therefore the decline of our university, therefore the decline of true higher education, is based on that we are stuck in a wrong paradigm and with a wrong economic model.
There is another question here.
Hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. Very interesting. I'm Mario. I work in Pompeu Fabra, and I work in artificial intelligence. So, as you said, we measure. My question is, as you said very well at the beginning, you can know perfectly all the classics and yet be a monster, right? So somehow, if we consider humanities as a knowledge, adding humanities to a person is not making it a good person. Probably because matters of being good or evil are matters of heart, not about mind. And sorry, I'm just trying to explain what I mean. What happens if we are getting it wrong? I mean, what happens if we try to give soul to the people through another knowledge, which is humanity, when we should instead focus on the heart? And of course, focusing on the heart means that I'm human if I can empathize with somebody, but of course, in order to be empathized, I need to know the pain of other people, letting resonate with me, and so I can get closer. And yeah, sorry, not able to explain, but maybe you can.
This is a very valuable point, and this is why I started with telling this story which Malapart tells in Caput, right? I mean, you can be extremely erudite and very musical and love Chopin and blah, 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 and be a monster. And again, he was not the exception. I mean, there were many, many monsters. What unfortunately quite often is forgotten, or on purpose forgotten. I mean, Steven Pinker, with his last book, I mean, which I think it's a very dishonest book, because he has at the end of the book a long list of all the intellectuals and artists who were complicit with totalitarianism, not one scientist. And I had to debate him on the BBC, and I said, you know, why are the scientists? No, the scientists did not do something like that. Well, have you ever heard of Dr. Mengele? I mean, it's complete nonsense. So, no, there is no pill. There is no easy thing. Okay, if I just read a lot of books, I'll be a good human being. Or if I go to church every day, I'm a good human being. I mean, that simply does not exist. But what we do know is the following. As you rightly mentioned, the human art, what kind of person you are. Well, I mean, there are certain things we know. First of all, we know that in general life can be a very difficult thing, because of we are born with our fears and frustrations and our longing for recognition, and then things can happen. You can get a disease. People who love you can die or betray you. Many things. Yeah? Unamuno, the tragic sense of life. It's unfortunately one of the things forgotten, but the fact we all know. The tragic sense of life is there all the time. We also know how extremely difficult it is to express yourself, to even have an understanding of what's going on here inside you. It's difficult. Here is where the muses come in. And what is the big difference between the muses and amusement? Amusement is a form of escapism. The muses is giving you a language which makes it possible for you certainly to understand something of your own emotions and to be able to communicate it just by saying, well, listen to this music or see this movie, or then you will understand. So it's a form of communication, and it's a form of opening up. And then philosophy, I mean, again, it's not information, it's not knowledge, it's about wisdom. It's about having a certain understanding at a certain moment. What is going on, what this world is, who you are, what you want to be. And therefore, Socrates is absolutely right. Those two questions, what's the right way of life and what's a good society, you will have to ask them again and again and again, because you will never find a definitive answer. Because things are changing, you are changing, there are new things happening in your life. And so you have, again, for all these fundamental things, the world of culture is what I said, an invitation. It's nothing more than that, but it's a crucial invitation. Because we can also give a long list how the invitation works. I mean, if you read Primo Levi, if this is a man, his life-saving moment is when he starts to remember certain cantos of Dante. And that Alexander Watt, when he's imprisoned in the Lubyanka prison, and he's on the prison roof, and somewhere he hears, of the Matthew Passion of Bach. It's a life-saving moment. And so it's always there. And life is a difficult thing, life is a complex thing, but we are creating a very cruel, inhumane, almost impossible world by this total focus on science, technology, started blah, 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 and we forget the human being and we forget the human soul. And everything what is there as a gift, to help us further in life.
Well, if we'll have to leave it here, because if not, we'll go too long on time. But thank you very much. Thank you for the talk, for your answers. And thanks a lot. Now it's time for Josep Maria Vilalta. He's the Goonies director and the executive secretary of la CUP, l'Associació Catalana d'Universitats Públiques, and he will present us the results, the key points and the questions that came out from the research on the synergy that arise among science, technology, and humanities at the higher education. Please, Josep Maria, thanks a lot. A big applause for him as well.
Bon dia.
Good morning, one and all.
I'll speak in English today. Sorry for Catalan colleagues. Authorities, friends, all those who are following the stream around the world. It's really an honor to be here today to present the GUNi World Report and to do so in such a beautiful place, this emblematic venue as the Casa Ramona factory, designed by modernist architect Josep Puig i Cadafalch, and currently the home of Caixa Forum, a permanent source of culture and humanism on an international scale. And it is also relevant, and I connect with the words of Rob Freeman. It is also relevant to mention that today is an emblematic day. It's apart from the presentation of this report. On 10th December, we commemorate the Universal Human Rights Declaration. So because of this, we thought it would be a perfect occasion today to make the official presentation of this GUNi report. So let's go with the presentation. And first of all, I'll try. Yeah. First of all, I would like to start my talk by introducing for some minutes GUNi, which, as you know, is promoted by UNESCO and ACUP. Yes, it's working. So GUNi, as you maybe know, was created 20 years ago, just after the first UNESCO World Conference on Higher Education in Paris in 1998. And one of the main purposes of GUNi was precisely to monitor and to guide everything agreed upon this conference in 1998, the first World Conference on Higher Education by UNESCO. After 20 years, GUNi's mission is still fully relevant. I would say even more relevant than at its inception, to strengthen the role of higher education in society by contributing to the renewal of the visions and policies of higher education across the world under the vision of public service, relevance, and social responsibility. Today, as the rector mentioned before, more than 220 institutions, mainly universities, UNESCO chairs, and higher education research centers in 80 countries around the world are part of GUNi. This major presence around the world is precisely, from my point of view, one of the main elements of GUNi's social capital. At a time when partnership, cooperation, and joint ventures are an excusable duty for making globalization a shared space in the advancement of knowledge. What about the GUNi's objectives? So I'll show you here. Our mainly three objectives are the following. First of all, to encourage higher education institutions to reorient their roles in order to broaden their social value and contribution. Second, to bridge the gap between developed and developing countries and fostering capacity building and cooperation and in full engagement with the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations. And third, to promote the exchange of resources, innovative ideas and experiences on globally relevant knowledge on emerging issues in higher education. In this respect, as you maybe know, we try to develop these objectives through 5 main activities. The first one is the edition of the World Reports on relevant topics for higher education in the world. The second is the holding of international seminars, congresses, and workshops on matters of interest. Third, the development of international projects. Fourth, the fostering of the different regional GUNi networks in all 5 continents. And finally, the dissemination of knowledge and debate through publications, newsletters, social networks, and GUNi's own website. So sorry, because there were a specific slide on that. So these are our 5 main activities: the Higher Education World Report, the organization of seminars and conferences, the projects, the regional networks in all 5 continents, and the dissemination of knowledge. As for our current lines of work, we are mainly working on the last years on the following topics: the development of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its assumption in higher education institutions. Second, the social responsibility of universities. So that means social commitment, responsible research and innovation, accountability, and the third mission of universities. The third, the global and local commitment of higher education institutions, referring to our previous world report, and the response to such global issues as climate change and the future of employment. And finally, as we are presenting today, the role of the humanities in society and higher education and the interrelations between science, technology, and humanities. Since today, GUNi has published 6 world reports, today the 7th, on various emerging issues in the field of higher education and university policy. All of them are published in English, but some of them have been also published in other languages, in Chinese, in Spanish, and in Portuguese, as well as summarized versions of several world reports. So here you have all the world reports that we have been published on the last years. Just for your information, until today, more than 400 experts from 60 countries from all over the world have contributed to these reports, and 20,000 reports have been distributed all around the world. What about the new world report that we are presenting today? So here we have some information about this world report presented today. Is titled Humanities and Higher Education, Synergies between Science, Technology and Humanities. Why we decided to go on this topic? Why this world report? With the new world report, we were looking in depth at the role of the humanities in higher education throughout the world and in culture in general, in teaching and university education, but also in research and university extension, and in the interrelations between universities and their environments. I mean educational, social, cultural, economic and technological environments. This report has taken a different approach to other international reports on the state of the humanities. We have avoided the view from the sector itself. So it means humanities academics discussing about their own disciplines. And instead of that, sought a more, let's say, novel approach from the perspective of the 3 major fields of knowledge: the science, the technology, and the humanities. We sought to analyze the state of humanities in higher education institutions and what their role should be in the comprehensive training of university students. Likewise, we have deliberately sought to approach the humanities in higher education from 2 different perspectives, but which we view as complementary. On the one hand, the interrelations between, as I mentioned before, science, technology, and the humanities in a world like the one we are in today, where technology and science flood everything and are at the center of so many social, economic, and cultural changes. And on the other hand, the humanities in higher education in the context of the indispensable, I would say, interrelations between universities and their environments: cultural, educational, social, economic. So we have expressly sought to address the issues from a, let's say, porous university, open university system that plays its part in the culture and society that surrounds it. In keeping with what has been GUNi's focus since its inception, the World Report not only offers analysis of a specific topic, but also aims to contribute with institutional experiences and specific cases, as well as recommendations in terms of public policy and university management. So we were trying to do as well this work of applying and trying to concrete recommendations for governments, for universities, for institutions. So there is a clear intent to make proposals and for this to be applicable. How did we do the world report? So the report, as you maybe know, has been led by a local editorial team of major professional value. Here we are. 3 academics have represented, let's say, the 3 fields of knowledge. So we have decided to put, leading the project, 3 persons representing each of them one sector, so science, technology, and humanities. These are the philosopher Marina Garces, the biologist, geneticist David Bueno, and the technologist, computer scientist Josep Casanovas. So they 3, in a few minutes, they will be taking part in an open debate. I would like to take this opportunity to most sincerely thank them in public for the way this shared project has become a reality and their leadership. Thank you very much to all of you. Without you, Marina, David, Josep, the report would not have been possible, and it has been a pleasure to learn and become a little wiser with you. Thank you so much. We have also had an international advisory board. Here we are, formed by professors Rossi Braidotti, Gemma Derrick, Arne Jarrick, and Alireza Omitbax. Many thanks to all 4 of you for your complicity and expert support. Some more information about the report. The report has taken 2 years to produce. This period included, maybe some of you were there, the holding of an international congress on the subject, which was held at the Cosmocaixa in Barcelona more or less a year ago, in November 2018, and was attended by some 200 experts from around the world. Since the very first moment that the editorial team started work on the report, we have sought to avoid 2 approaches that often occur when it comes to the humanities. One is catastrophism, and the other is protectionism, which often fit each other. What those approaches do is either highlight, let's say, what is being lost, and warn of the ethical, political, social, and cultural consequences, or propose different measures to, let's say, conserve and preserve the institutional and academic space of what, from the epistemological division of knowledge, the humanities have traditionally been understood to be. The debate about the role of humanities nowadays, as Rob Riemann was expressing so interesting a moment ago, is not being carried out in a timeless space, but in a new era in which we are already fully immersed. Technological and scientific changes, climatic and environmental challenges, a fragmented and unbalanced post-colonial global world. These are neither sectorial nor incremental changes. They are profound transformations that affect the very meaning of what we mean by human in relation to society or societies and the life of the planet as a whole. In this context, the humanities are not a set of disciplines to preserve or conserve, that's from our point of view, but a set of activities that are also utilitarian and applicable, that must be cultivated through relevant research with the necessary and appropriate goals and models to face up the new challenges, in the good belief that they are indispensable, for it is on them that the capacity to make sense and the value out of human experience depends, and for this to be done in commitment to the dignity, equality, and reciprocity of these values. How is the report structured? In practical terms, the report is structured in these 9 areas, as I mentioned here. So that's worldwide context, knowledge society, institutional perspective, education, research, impact, gender and equality, environmental and engagement. These are the 9 areas of this report, as we have shown in the screen. But at the same time, we specify these 9 areas with 24 key questions. So we were, with the editorial team, we were discussing about specific questions that we want to attack, to work with the World Report. We should also point out that some special contributions have been included, as well as a total of 28 specific cases, programs, experiences from all around the world. And in total, as it has been said before, 130 experts from all over the world have contributed to the report. I would like to express again our most sincere gratitude to all of them for their thoughts and for having such confidence in GUNi. Finally, the report also includes a section of reflections that are, of course, open and in permanent critical debate. As you already know, the full content report is available online just now, so if you go through the internet, you will find it in our website in open access. So that's our way of approaching, so everything is open to everybody. We have also printed an abridged version that you will get today at the end of the presentation. And now, what? For us, the report is not the final stop on this journey. The idea is for it to serve as the starting point for GUNi's line of work for the coming years. We understand that the reflections within it can help to develop specific projects, studies, shared programs, institutional initiatives between countries, and help to design public policies in the area of higher education and research worldwide. In this sense, GUNi offers its capacities to any institution that wish to collaborate with us in the area for the shape of higher education systems and universities. Also, at the local level, as the Catalan Association of Public Universities, we are at the service of any institution to undertake joint ventures and projects in this topic. I cannot end this presentation without a series of acknowledgements of all the institutions and people who have made this work possible. First of all, the sponsoring institutions. The Caixa Foundation, la Fundació La Caixa, both Caixa Forum and the Foundation itself, for their support with the preparation and publication of the report. So, thank you very much. Moltes gràcies, Àngel Font i tot l'equip de la Fundació La Caixa. The Government of Catalonia, specifically the Secretary of Universities and Research and the Department of Foreign Affairs, Institutional Relations and Transparency. Thank you very much, Xavier Grau. Moltes gràcies, Xavier, per la vostra complicitat i el vostre suport. Moltes gràcies, conseller Bosch, pel...
Thank you, Minister Bosch, for your support.
Ministry of Science, Universities and Innovation of the Spanish Ministry, of the Spanish government, sorry. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, José Manuel Pinga.
Thank you very much, Secretary of Universities. Thanks for your support and your help.
Acknowledgement to the editorial committee again. Thank you so much to Marina Garces, David Bueno, Josep Casanovas. I see Marina, I see David. I don't see Josep. I think it's... okay. But it's here with us as well. It has been a highly stimulating intellectual adventure, and I'm sure that we will continue working together on future projects concerning everything that the report contains. Acknowledgement as well to the International Advisory Council, so to the professors Rossi Braidotti, Gemma Derrick, Arne Jarrick, and Alireza Omid Bax. And also a very heartfelt thanks to all the GUNi ACUP team. Moltes gràcies a tot l'equip de GUNi.
Thank you very much to the team.
Betts, Victoria Gomez, Marta Cayetano, and all the rest of the team. A team small in number, but huge in terms of professionalism and commitment. Acknowledgement also to the 130 authors from around the world, and finally to UNESCO. Thank you very much, Francesc, for representing UNESCO today here in this event, for its permanent support and complicity. Thank you so much to the UNESCO political team for their continued and tireless efforts for the good of culture, science, and education around the world. I'm finishing. Now that we are 20 years old, so we are young but not so much, we want to relaunch GUNi for the next 10 years. We aim to do so with modesty, working almost as artisans at the service of higher education. We feel strong about the work we have done on the last 20 years, and a sense of responsibility for bringing together more than 220 institutions from 80 countries with UNESCO support. That is why we are already working on what will be the next World Report. This is still a secret for you, but we are working on the next one. And we are also at the advanced stage of conversations. I think we can say that today, Francesc, and institutions from the Spanish government, from the Catalan government, from the Barcelona City Hall. We are at the advanced stage of conversations with UNESCO and local institutions about hosting and co-organizing the third World Conference on Higher Education in Barcelona in 2 years, in 2021. That's our wish, that's our ideal to work with our institutions. 20 years on, in full responsibility and based on all of the progress made thus far, at GUNi we feel strong enough to reinvent ourselves and intensify our role in analysis, debate, and proposal at the service of progress and innovation in higher education around the world. We invite you, all of you, to join us with the firm intention of working together to forge greater progress, well-being, and global justice in our societies. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Moltes gràcies.
Moltes gràcies, Josep Maria.
Thank you very much, Josep Maria. So the time has arrived. Now, debate. We have been informing you about the debate that is about to take place with the editorial team members, Marina Garces, David Bueno, Josep Casanovas. Please, would you be so kind as to join me? Marina Garces, well, it has been said before, she's a philosopher and a lecturer in UOC. David Bueno is a lecturer in UB University and the director of a neuroeducation research project. And Josep Casanovas is a lecturer of UPC, Barcelona Tech, UPC, and a researcher also in the Barcelona Supercomputer Center and director of the InLab. So the three of them are here. Thank you very much for being here. It's always difficult to describe people, to present people today. Actually, it has been said in many times. There's the academic side of us all, the more emotional side of us all. I have tried to carry out a small summary. Not so sure I managed to. But the debate that we are to open is a reflection, from reflection to action, and it's going to be done through science fiction and audiovisual narrative. So it's going to be a quite cross-cutting approach. We will be precisely speaking about humanities versus science, science, technology, science versus technology, different models to create knowledge, and potential future scenarios, likely and unlikely ones. And to do so, we're going to be using audiovisual narratives. We will start with a clip of a film entitled Downsizing.
Population. We are proud to unveil the only practical remedy to humanity's gravest problem. Are you ready, Doctor?
Yes, I'm ready.
Wow, that is wild, isn't it? It's just wild. That's Dave Johnson.
Hey, everybody.
And Carol. He never struck me as the kind of guy who'd go get small.
Downsizing takes the pressure right off.
Plus, you're really making a difference.
You mean all that crap about saving the planet?
Yeah.
Downsizing is about saving yourself. We live like kings. Got best houses, best restaurants, Cheesecake Factory. Got 3 of them.
In Leisureland, your $52,000 translates to $12.5 million to live on for life.
Wow.
Do you understand that you will undergo the permanent and irreversible medical procedure commonly known as downsizing, and that your bodies will be approximately 0.0364% of their current mass and volume?
Nervous?
Little.
I no és d'estranyar que estigués nerviós.
No wonder he was nervous, because as we have seen in the short clip, well, science found a solution to climate change, which was downsizing individuals, human beings. This would be a possible way to, use less resources, natural resources. In this film, there are debates about many of the dilemmas and the social models on human weaknesses. Greed is still a reality even if you are downsized. So perhaps it's the right time to ask Marina as a philosopher. So we are facing an environment of climate change, and there are solutions such as downsizing. So we're humanists here. What the role of humanists should be? Well, thank you very much, Irene, and thank you very much to all of you for being here. Since it's the last meeting in which I'm invited under the umbrella of this project, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for allowing us to contribute to the report. Your question has to do with my role in this joint venture. I acted as a humanist between different professionals, scientific experts, technology experts, etc. Well, philosophy, I wouldn't say it's a classical humanity. Actually, philosophy is a split from what we call science today. So if we ask ourselves, what is the role of humanist experts? Well, probably they are trying to survive in any sort of horrible job within and without, or outside universities, inside the country or in other countries, because we have to remember that many people are abroad trying to earn a living. So where are humanities in narratives? I think Francesc Pedro referred to it perfectly. They are oftentimes the tip of the iceberg. They are never really invited into the discussion fora. They are often referred to when it comes to overcoming the major global challenges, but they are not really taken seriously. Now, when we assess the university system, humanities and humanists are residual. Yeah, of course, they are allocated some resources, as Jose Maria Bilalta was saying before, so we are like, like a little dust in the system, or they are even sometimes parody. Humanities are becoming a parody of scientific production, pretending to be competitive, pretending to also contribute to the university, contributing with an impact, right? With an impact. Knowledge today is not so much about understanding the world, but rather having an impact on the university system value. Whereas if we check what is the situation of humanities, in society, there are precarious humanists, right? Everywhere in all different jobs, in editorial jobs, in the also audiovisual industry. And of course, there is a certain mediatic stars. There are some mediatic stars because, of course, the academic system is not isolated from other communication environments. We live in the information society, so there are some leaders, of course, and there are some, humanist leaders, some mediatic stars. So all this, in the case of what we have tried to ask ourselves, well, we have taken a very clear approach. It's not so much about what can we save of humanities or what can we save of science, technology, etc. No, we didn't take this approach. We just took the following approach. We thought, okay, there's no knowledge. It doesn't matter how much science we produce, but knowledge is not possible unless there's a shared world experience. Even if we have an amazing ranking, figures and figures and figures when it comes to producing patents and new disciplines, knowledge will not happen unless we have a shared experience of the world. And humanities deal with this point, right? Not as isolated disciplines, but rather as an approximation to all sorts of knowledge of science. So from our perspective, humanists should be everywhere, but not like considered experts. No. Do you want to be a humanist science expert? Do you want to be a humanist nurse or a humanist doctor? We believe that all citizens should be capable of interacting with their knowledge, with their work, from a humanistic perspective, from a shared experience perspective of a world which is crossed by questions that touch us all, by injustices that hurt us all. And that's what's human, right? We are not objects of study. No, what's human, what makes us more or less human, we don't really know where does our humanity start or end, but that's what makes us human. That's why we believe that humanists are needed everywhere, not in silos, not in zoos, not residual. No, we want to be capable of being everywhere to sharing our experience of the world. And that's why we sit here all together. We have not been appointed some humanists to speak about what's going on in our universities. No, we have started working together, an engineer, a biologist, and myself, not to act and build a cake, let's say, but rather to come with a more or less an answer to all these questions that somehow articulate the true index of the report, which is composed by more than 24 questions, right? So what happens when we think together, and why are we not thinking together in universities and in society as a whole, which at the end of the day is what we need to be doing, right? So the way we have been working is a will declaration, is a declaration of goodwill. We should, science, technology, and humanities, this is a way to distort reality, to distort knowledge. We need to discuss, we need to start thinking together. So I believe, to conclude, that we need humanists everywhere to share knowledge, to share a common understanding of the world. So, humanists everywhere. Good. So you've had a pilot project here. Interesting. Giuseppe. And I believe that, well, it was clear in the film, but also during the keynote presentation, science, technology are moving forward. Do you think it would be necessary to put a break, or perhaps a tool at least, to science and technology, and this would be the humanists? Do you think innovation has to be somehow stopped? No. Research and innovation systems are complex, and not like they can be stopped. It would be almost impossible to put a limit to science But of course, it doesn't mean we cannot open a debate about innovation. I come from engineering. I have an engineering background, a technology background, and of course, I've come to the conclusion that when I interact with humanists, the way they are funded is just ridiculous. It just, you deduct a couple of zeros to do what we do, which is complex, but it doesn't mean it's more complex than what they are doing, right? So they are infra-funded, that's for sure. And this conditions things. So now regarding your question, probably many research is being stopped because there's no funding for certain research. Why is that so? That's what we need to discuss, right? Because the experience that Marina has described is has been very positive, actually. Working hand in hand, even if I know I'm not sticking to your question, but still, after many years of working in a horizontal way, in a cross-cutting way, this project has opened my eyes in the sense that what we call transdisciplinary is not so much so, actually. It's an interdisciplinary work, you know. We are more or less sensitive with other disciplines, but we lack a basis that will allow us to transform our minds, right? To transform our mindset. We need to think, okay, our youth, when they are our age, how are they going to be living? What tools do they need? And we need to overcome all these barriers that we have inherited. The future will not be specialized, probably. It's not, you know, in the middle of the project, the young of the future will not be like, okay, I know nothing here, so now your turn. No, we are intelligent, we're clever as human beings, so I believe we all should have a holistic vision of what the world is, of what research is, of what humanities are, of course. Anyone in a research center or in a university, we have this capacity, but we haven't digged in, and we haven't developed this capacity. So now trying to answer to your specific question. By the way, it's a very interesting film, Downsizing. It makes you think a great deal. And there's no doubt that we need to start thinking about how to invest the limited resources that we have. How are we taking decisions on how or on where to allocate the limited resources we have? And then there's a very difficult item here, which will require of humanism and humanities. We need to prioritize, for sure. We need to take decisions on whether the final objective of a very complex research system in a specific area has to do with, I don't know, achieving an improvement of 6 months or 1 year in life in a cancer patient, which is important, but is really that the objective that we have as a society? I'm not so sure about it. And then there's another thing, which oftentimes is not easy to say. I am from the public sector, right? Research and innovation is not taking place only in universities, but also in many other areas in the private sector, in public and private institutes. So priorities change depending on whether you are in the private or in the public sector. Other stakes on the table. Okay, thank you. You used a word which will be key, prioritizing. We will now have a second audiovisual narrative. Can we say it now? And prioritizing here will be very important as a concept.
Okay, so, no, I think it's...
Who would you save? The pedestrian in the road or the drivers in the car? It's not easy, and yet that's the kind of decision which millions of autonomous cars would have to make in the near future. We program the machine, but who do we tell it to save? That is the setup of the moral machine experiment. Some decisions might seem simple. Should the car save a family of 4 or a cat? But what about a homeless person and their dog instead of a businessman? Or how about 2 athletes and an old woman instead of 2 school children?
Bé, és un dilema gran.
So this is a very important dilemma. Oftentimes, we tend to forget that algorithms and softwares are designed by human beings, right? So human beings are behind. An ethical dilemma cannot be wiped out only due to the fact that machines implement things, right? We are moving towards a driverless cars, etc. But yeah, that's a very interesting thing. So in humans, we are capable of, being contradictory, making exceptions, etc. But machines aren't. They are quite rigid, right? So all this will have to be programmed. And how will this be programmed? As a human brain? So David Bueno, what can you tell us from this perspective? How can we overcome this dilemma? How does our brain work? And well, this dilemma is really complex. There's no doubt about it. The first thing we should understand is what morals are, right? What is a moral decision? Intelligent car, what does intelligent mean, right? If we don't have a definition of what that means, as human beings in theory are intelligent and moral. So how can we overcome, or how can we, let's say, upload these decisions into a machine? So I'm taking here a rather human perspective here. How does our brain work? Moral decisions are based on a quick check that the brain carries out about costs and benefits of a specific decisions in each situation, taking into account our previous experience, right? So an intelligent car has no previous experience, right? Well, depending on what we have programmed. But us, as human beings, we all have our own previous experiences that cannot be shared because we are not even aware of many of our previous experiences. So we do this quick check, this quick cost and benefit check, and this is quite individual. It's very difficult to extrapolate it in order to come up with a regulation and say our morals work this way. We work in a planet which is multicultural or transcultural, whatever you want to call it, but we don't think the same way. We don't see life the same way here in Catalonia or in another country of Europe or in Africa or in the Brazilian rainforest, because costs and benefits vary depending on the context. This has been studied. This has been studied quite broadly in psychology. It's called the tramway dilemma. It's a very simple one. Imagine that you are on a bridge. There's a tramway underneath, and in the other side of the bridge there's a group of people who can't see the tramway, and the tramway driver can't see them either. But in front of us there's someone who doesn't know what's going on, and if we push this person so that this person falls, the tramway is going to run this person over, but we will solve a big amount of people who can't see the tramway. So what would we do, right? So this question has been repeated in many different formats, and the question, and the answer rather, is not easy. So if I have to push this person for this person to fall, the majority of people would say, no, I wouldn't do that. But if the answer is, well, this person is already in the way, well, perhaps it's better for the tramway to run over one person than 10. But few people say, I would jump. Actually, no one says that, right? But it's a third option, there's no doubt about it. So you will end up, if you jump, you will end up saving the poor guy that knows nothing about what's going on and the other group of people. And the amount of responses vary depending on the language you're asked the question. If you're asked the question in your mother tongue, you have a more emotional response. Whether if you are asked the question in a foreign language, the answer is much more rational, and you would say, well, I would throw the person down to save the others. Whereas if it's an emotional answer, you would say, I would let God decide. So how can this be integrated in an automated car, and how this be replicated in different cultures that for sure perceive things differently? Even if we have an example here, right? Two boys or an old lady, well, even of course, child has certain rights. A couple of weeks ago, we celebrated the celebration of the Human Rights Declaration and the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, but not all countries interpret it the same way. In some countries, they haven't accepted the rights of the child as such. So how can you insert all these codes in a machine? And here's when we have a dilemma, right? These problems are complex or difficult. It's different, right? I believe it's a very important distinction. If it's a complicated problem, don't worry. You just dig in a discipline and answer it. Probably it will be easy to answer it. You will end up finding an answer. Whereas if the problem is complex, you need all disciplines on board. You need to make the most of human diversity. Otherwise, you will not find a solution. The same happens with climate change and global warming. It's a complex phenomena. It makes no sense. I know it's not the question you make me, but there's no point in, celebrating a big meeting to decide what we're going to be doing with humanity, with the rest of us outside, without really knowing what they're deciding. They're taking decisions on a complex problem as if it was a complicated problem. And that's why we need to work together to build synergies from the technical perspective and from philosophy and humanities to find complex solutions. It's very interesting, this distinction between complexity and difficulty, right? Because we use it as synonyms, and oftentimes they are not. Interactions make things complicated, right? It's not like, oh, if you use one discipline to answer to a complex problem, it's not going to happen, right? And now I would like to combine disciplines. I would like to ask Giuseppe for something which is even more complex, ideology, right? Because beyond everything, there's ideology, as you said. Pollution, nuclear pollution. Some countries decide that the elderly, since they are living the end stage of their life, they volunteer to clean up nuclear waste, and this is related to ideology, right? I would like to ask Giuseppe, what should technology say in order to respond to this kind of problems? In UPC, you work in areas like that, so what's the role of ideology in the resolution of conflicts through program designing? As David tells us more about the question you asked him, I came up with an alternative answer, which is the following. Imagine something which is not going to be possible. Perhaps you will tell me it is possible. Imagine that we have incorporated a chip, and this chip will inform us about different things, right? So in the episode that you were describing right before, say there's a person who should be pushed, right, in the tramway dilemma. Imagine that the person perceives this information through the chip in another scenario, and this has to do with the automated car. So imagine the person knows that in order to save the species, he or she has to jump. I don't think this is possible, but say it is possible. We're not that far from it. This is a scenario, right? Of course, this episode is perhaps too anecdotal, but there are other situations in which this discussion, this debate, well, actually Rob referred to this, right? The data, dictatorship, etc. Now we realize that we need to, I work in a super computational center where we try to treat data in the most intelligent possible way. But there's no doubt that the amount of data that we are producing is not going to be manageable in the future if there's an ideology behind. And we're far from here, right? because it's been only 10 years that we realized that we're using IoT, the Internet of Things. Each little car today is a little computer that communicates with the rest of the world. And the automated car project, the driverless car thing driven by an algorithm, it's a possibility. We're speaking about things that are connected. And the main principle has to do with moving freely. When we walk, we don't run over people because we self-organize ourselves, more or less. So we could add many more layers, actually, to what you said. It's not so much the way we take decisions in an heroic way, in a cinematographic way, like in the tramway dilemma, right? But there are more simple examples. There are more simple scenarios. The question, I don't know if it's a question or not, I don't know if it's ideology or not. Life and development, do they go hand in hand with a cost? Are there species that commit suicide for collective good? Probably you know it better than I. But human beings, we have a pattern not to accept any sacrifice. Is progress going to have painful impacts in the future? I believe that's what we're discussing about here, because at the end of the day, when we think about the possibility of having algorithms taking autonomous decisions, well, this is not abstract or neutral. What will this depend on? Oh, if I'm like, oh, okay, I'm the elderly one, so perhaps it's better for me to die and the younger will survive. Machines should do the same, and we know that it's not a very solid behavior. And then there's another thing. Let's take the example of the automated car. There are many important things that we should be reflecting about how society works, such as shared cars. Shared cars are transforming the sector. The automotive sector knows that not everyone will buy a car like 25 years ago. In the past, when you were 18 years old, you wanted a car right away. So it's not even the case amongst youth. Youth don't think this way anymore, probably because they can't afford to buy a car. But hey, anyway, so the fact that things are changing, that mobility is changing, mobility is a human right, and mobility is being articulated through public transport today, because at the end of the day, public transport, private transport is a mutation of public transport, right? And now we are adapting to the way we get organized, and we have to share cars today. Do you remember the yuppies? Back at the yuppie era, everything was justified. Personal triumph was essential. Whereas today, I believe that if we share more and more, human greed will be moderated, and limits can only be imposed by commitment, and then compassion is possible, as it has been said before. I think that's a very interesting debate. The example you gave, from public transport to self-driven cars. So humanities, and it has been said in many occasions, are and will be key to overcome scientific question marks. So we need humanistic scientific experts. I would like to ask Marina, what about the other way around? Probably there are many professionals in humanities that are better understanding the use of science in today's philosophical debates. Are you gaining interest in science? Well, it's not so much about doing your homework, or rather being educated, or and organizing education differently. It's not so much about putting more homework to anyone. We have a key problem, and I believe this has been one of the axes of the work that we've done in the report, which is, well, of course, there's no doubt about it. We need to understand that the problems we are facing in the university system, in the research dilemmas, etc., is a bottom-up dilemma, right? And I believe that probably the problem starts in secondary education. There is a split. It's not so much about letters or science, it's much more complex. It's a very segmented scenario, and there is a split. And as a result of that, there is a mutual indifference, like, I hate math, I'm not interested in math, and others go like, oh, I'm not interested in reading or in language. Well, language and math are essential languages, such as music, aesthetics, image, feel and touch, or I don't know, or cooking. Everything is important. All essential languages end up becoming a mutually exclusive message that mutually reject each other, and this is horrible, and it has been criticized, of course, and it seems like we are trying to overcome that now, but this is not turning into real transformative actions that change things, that contribute to changing things. Of course, we need to discuss about MIT and self-driven cars, etc. But this is a distorted mirror, because I think the problems start at the beginning. Ethics is a silly subject oftentimes, and teachers don't want to teach ethics because children don't like ethics, or math and language are contradictory one with another. Like, if you're good in math, you don't need to be good in English. Not an interesting response. So how can we assure that this synergy, which of course will be complex, how can we ensure that moral machines are well fundamented from the basis? Of course, we're taking a higher education approach here, but I believe that we all agree, and David also will refer to that also, the important task here and the co-responsible university, because it's not so much about, you know, throwing the problem to teachers or to schools. No, universities are responsible of opening up people's mindsets so that my question would be, how can we gather the different disciplines? Well, by having a sound basic education system at all levels. Today there's the whole long life learning logic, so whenever we learn something, we have to understand what's on the roots, what's on the basis of such knowledge, what's going on in this discipline. If we don't have a sophisticated discipline, we tend to forget everything, right? We need a basic sound knowledge in all areas, in grammar. What happens with the grammar? No one knows about grammar. Yesterday I was studying verbs with my son, you know, the different verb tenses, and I thought, why 5 past tenses and 2 futures and 1 present tense only? This is grammar. But you realize that language modulates time. You bring past forward. You keep an action open. You place an action in a time that you recognize as your own time or don't recognize. This is politics. This is ethics. This is aesthetics. This is science. Why don't we only look forward? Why does science only speak about the future? Right? I would urge everyone to reinforce the roots, the basis, basic education at all levels. If there is no sound basis, we will just be envying the MIT but do nothing. Very interesting, this trip back to the basis. Perhaps this is not what we're going to be doing, but we'll go to the selection process. What happens when we are to enroll into a new bachelor? We'll see now a fragment of a film, and then we will discuss it a little bit further.
C'est une année difficile. Pour ceux qui n'ont pas eu de mention au bac S, vos chances sont de 2%. Tu
connais la différence entre un étudiant en médecine et un étudiant en prépa? Le demandeur d'apprendre le bottin par cœur. L'étudiant en prépa, il te demandera pourquoi. Et l'étudiant en médecine, pour quand.
On commence le matin par une matière difficile, puis pause déj, 40 minutes. Une matière facile l'après-midi jusqu'à 17h. Pause goûter, 20 minutes. On enchaîne avec 2 heures d'une matière difficile. Et le soir, on fait des annales jusqu'à ce qu'on soit cuit. À ce rythme-là, c'est jouable. T'en dis quoi?
Vous avez 15 jours pour tout donner, 15 jours pour tout revoir.
C'est à Caros que ça se devient. Le mieux, c'est de faire des annales, franchement. Faut qu'on devienne des machines à répondre aux questions. Hein.
Et la fac? Ça va?
La phosphoglucomutase.
Non mais sérieux?
3 heures pour répondre à 72 questions avec 5 réponses au choix. Ça fait environ 2 minutes par question. Donc à ce rythme-là, c'est impossible de réfléchir. Soit on répond par réflexe reptilien, soit au hasard. Donc je pense que les meilleurs, enfin ceux qui deviendront médecins, se rapprochent plus du reptile que de l'être humain. Je vais être médecin.
On s'inquiète pas trop.
Il a complètement pété un plomb.
Bah carrément.
Bien, ça fait une place en plus. C'est moche mais c'est vrai.
Tout seul, j'y arriverai pas. Mais avec toi, c'est jouable.
T'as pris trop de retard, hein, c'est mort.
Vous pouvez prendre connaissance du sujet d'examen.
Attends, j'en peux plus là, j'en ai marre. On fait une pause? Ouais, carrément. Pause maths? Allez, dérivée, stats, intégrale.
Sembla exagerat, però segurament...
Well, it might sound exaggerated, but oftentimes those who want to enroll in MIT go through this kind of test. And we also have the selectividad. There are several processes, especially for highly demanded bachelors. That's cruelty, right? Does this make us good professionals or rather competitive? I would like to open this debate. I would like to ask David, you are an expert in education. How do you think that we could ensure a higher education or a long-lasting education which is more integrated, that boosts our intellectual capacities but also our personal capacities? Well, to be honest, even if the report is focused on higher education, at the end of the day, the seed has to be planted much earlier, before even being born. But within what we call education system, well, the seed has to be planted a little bit after being born as a human being. But this seed is extremely important. We cannot modify higher education, university, or other systems of education. You know, when you end what we call compulsory education, well, it cannot be changed. Higher education cannot be improved if we don't improve the seed. So depending on the seed, the plant will grow one way or another. And when it comes to what we want higher education to be, well, the first question that we would need to ask ourselves is, how do we want these human beings to look like when they grow old? And this is a very difficult question to answer. It's difficult to put it, but it's very difficult to answer as a question because it is related to ideology. That has been said before. We have been talking about ideology before. And how we want to shape our future, how we want to shape our youth, of course, is ideological, is deeply ideological. It's about reshaping the society of the future, right? So in science, we keep thinking about the past, as Marina said before. But of course, there is an ideology here. And here's when we start experiencing difficulties and limitations between different countries and different countries, because we all have a different cultural background, but also even within societies there are important differences, and there are some social classes that start or depart from a worse position, and perhaps they don't agree with us in our definition of higher education. So if we want to train professionals, but also if we want to train citizens capable of responding to complex problems from a complex approach, from an interaction-based approach, we need to ensure that primary education and secondary education takes this approach. Otherwise, it's impossible to achieve it. It does make no sense to split children early between math and humanities or science and humanities. It makes no sense, I believe. I don't mean by that either that they need to do everything all the time. Of course, a certain degree of a specialization is interesting to ensure that everyone finds their own motivation or interests, but we cannot just leave behind disciplines because, well, these, I'm not gonna study these anymore. Those students who, when they are, I don't know, 12 or 13 years old, each country is different, so it cannot be applied to other countries. But here in Spain, for example, there are pupils who, when they are 12 or 13 years old, if they decide to enroll in a humanistic path, they will never touch science again. If there's a subject called science for the contemporary world, but it's not really science, so no. I don't think this is an interesting approach. Those who decide to enroll in science, they lose humanities because they need to study physics, biology, geology, technical design, whatever it is. When in fact, as individuals, as a species, we are a highly communicative species. This is extremely biological, but as a species we survive because we communicate one with another. And communication means language, math, before Marina referred to it, art, aesthetics, everything is communication. Everything is communication. So from the moment we split things and we say, okay, you communicate this way, I communicate that other way, how are we going to find a common language? How are we going to find an answer to complex problems, to complex questions? So I believe what we need is to have a primary and secondary education which is inclusive. And this is one of the first problems that we find in the majority of the world educational systems. Not in all of them, but in many. They split things, knowledge is split by subjects, by topics. And the math teachers know nothing about what the language teacher was doing. So it's about integrating things. Things are not in silos. Life doesn't happen in silos. So why is the educational system split in silos? Of course, it doesn't mean that everything needs to be intermingled. There can be times for a certain degree of the specialization, but the big picture that we should have would have to break the silos, and teaching should be integrated, and education professionals should work in an integrated way. Here's another element that makes things difficult: selectividad, this final exam. Selectividad, in many countries they have a selection process similar to ours. It of course ensures a minimum level of knowledge, a numeric order of students, and a certain capacitation and self-management capacity, human and humanistic, for yourself and for society, in order to keep growing intellectually. And of course, depending on how these selection exams are designed, we are producing a bias. We are biasing generations towards one side or another. It's not the same to have a second exam in which you are assessing memoristic knowledge. I am just giving you extreme examples, right? It's not the same these memoristic exams than skills-based exams in which you assess individuals individually to see how people manage the complexity of their environment with situations that they have never seen, but with the minimum knowledge that they should have. So this is extremely important. It's very important to define it, and this, of course, allows us to reshape our higher education. So for the higher education to change, we need to change also the primary education scenario. There are some pilot projects, very interesting ones, where students from different disciplines are combined, they work together, and they share their field of expertise, and they all gain knowledge from one another. And they are not narrowed to neuroscience or humanities or whatever. So there are solutions out there, but of course we need to start from scratch and not so much from a top-down approach. Before you were referring to language, to words. Giuseppe, I think that you said that in UPC, IT studies, in the past it was called communication science. There was more or less a gender balance, right? But when we moved from communication sciences to engineering, you lost many women, right? Yes, I'm gonna try and respond to this question because my rector is here. The question popped up. So, what has happened with IT? Let's call it IT, computational science. And here we have some people who are very much expert in this topic. So this is not a new phenomenon. This hasn't happened only in our university. It's a rather global phenomenon. So our experience is that at the beginning it was called Faculty of IT, but actually it's an engineering faculty. But at the beginning, no one knew what IT was about, and the confusion was that, well, at the beginning many people said or thought that they were about to enroll in journalism, like a variety of journalism, and they ended up like in a totally different thing. Programming, etc. And of course there was a very high mortality rate. So we got to gender balance. It was very cool, yeah. I believe that the highest percentage was 36 against 70 something. But from a certain moment, well, we spotted that in the UK, for example, only 5% of women were enrolling in IT, and we thought, wow, why are we so special? Now we have, of course, lost many. We even had 10, 9%, which is very low. It's difficult to understand, but there's a global phenomenon, a complex global phenomenon. So the image that IT has and the image that we give to IT is important, right? Because if cinema is part of humanities, what image are we conveying of IT experts? Tend to be men, nerds. Oftentimes when, well, it's like a fat guy drinking a Coke, like a Jurassic Park horrible guy, right? It's like a horrible person, and then this is the image we are offering to, I don't know, to break into a bank and steal. So, of course, this has an impact. I have 2 daughters, and they are both engineers. And they are sensitive to other things, also to other disciplines. And I believe that as men, well, we don't care. Everything is dirty, it doesn't matter. Whereas for women, well, they don't like that. No, of course, I'm joking. But of course, there are many things that you go like, oh, how is that even possible? Yeah, well, it does condition because many women have even a wider capacity, analytical capacity, when it comes to IT and information, of course. The way women see the world is much wider. As men tend to be freaks, well, we're good at solving like specific problems and being specialized. Now, regarding the topic you were approaching, even if I'm changing the topic here, I believe we need to include self-criticism. We need to include self-criticism, as the bit mentioned before. Managers go like, oh, these students are horrible. Well, they come with the level they get, right? So it's more about saying what can be done. What can be done? And from universities, we need to understand that the system is not a system. There's a point when there's a gap. And there's this gap from selectividad to university. So, self-criticism. Teachers in the primary sector, in the primary education and in the secondary education have been in universities. So what are we doing wrong if we train teachers, primary and secondary education teachers, in a way that they don't improve their methodologies, right? So we could change things, and why are we not doing that? Is it because we are selfish? No, we need to be more self-critical. Things can be changed. Many things can be changed. The way we interpret things. Okay, let me give you an example. Someone with, I don't know, academic responsibilities, because he or she is a teacher or a lecturer. Have you ever thought about the math subject in the first year? Could it not be dosed throughout 4 years? Because there are concepts that will be much more easily integrated 4 years after, because they will be accompanied with a justification, right, of the equation, for example. So the mechanism is there, but it's not being used. Well, it's not an easy task, of course. It's not an easy task to transform departments and universities. I'm not saying it's an easy task, but many things can be done. And if we discuss amongst one another, it's going to be possible. Oh, everyone refers to the legal framework. The legal framework, of course, is a framework that can also be changed, because the legal framework will evolve thanks to experiences. And many pilot projects have been implemented, many efforts have been made. I believe we have an opportunity ahead. The system is mature, we know a great deal of things, and we need to rethink some mechanisms. Oh, like assessments. Well, thinking about assessments today has nothing to do with assessments in the past. We have been speaking about assessment for ages, but assessments are still like in the film. Well, of course, the film is exaggerated, but perhaps not that much. Perhaps not that much. And if you have, you know, university students at home, you will realize that you know how under how much pressure they are. Let's move on. We're gonna see another short clip that takes place in a school or in a university.
Cette année sera donc l'occasion d'étudier les grands auteurs de la langue française et surtout vous inciter à vous exprimer, à raconter des histoires.
0, 6, 3. Ils sont si mauvais que ça cette année?
C'est la classe la plus nulle de ma vie. Écoute ça, samedi j'ai mangé une pizza et regardé la télé. Dimanche, je n'ai rien fait. Je leur ai pas demandé de me faire un poème en alexandrin, hein. Je leur ai demandé de me raconter leur week-end. Samedi, je suis allé étudier chez Raphaël Artol. Je découvrais la maison. Une odeur retint mon attention, l'odeur si singulière des femmes de la classe moyenne.
Tu trouves pas ça choquant qu'un élève de 16 ans écrive un truc pareil?
Oh non, moi ça me choque pas.
T'as un don.
Aquesta és una pel·lícula també...
So this film is quite controversial and interesting. This teacher who all of a sudden finds out that, well, things are not going well, but there's one student who's gifted. So the relationship with our students. I would like to ask Marina, what do you think is the role of universities? What is your role? Are you there to spot gifted students? What is your role? So this film, it's a very interesting one. Not only, well, there's someone very interesting behind. And I believe it's a very interesting example of the invisible paths of the academic system. This is a French film, but Juan Mayorga is the script writer. Juan Mayorga is a script writer, and he's also a philosopher and a mathematician. And I know him a little bit, and he told me that when he was young, he was a freak, as you said before, as you were describing before. It's very freak to be a philosopher and a mathematician at the same time. So he told me once that he spent a crazy life studying math during the day and studying philosophy at night, and he found a language that allowed him to reintegrate in the other's world through theater. And this, of course, is the clear proof of a limitation, the academic system as a derivative of a culture consumer, and the integration between different expression systems, communication systems, and not recognizing a scriptwriter who is also a mathematician and a philosopher, and who has to be ascended somehow, right? And live in different silos. I believe this is a perfect example of how universities, and we have used the word systems many times, and universities are being understood as a community of social practices. It's not being understood as such. It's not being understood as a, for political experiences. Universities are designed as a system to which you enter and exit. There's an access pathway and a battle, which is tragic. A tragic battle. There's a long battle to get into university. Then if you want to stay there, it's even worse, right? This is a never-ending. But the system defines itself as a system with an entry and with an exit. You enter university and you have a university experience, and you go like, oh, what am I going to do when I get out into the world, when I'm thrown into the world? Well, I believe that universities, well, if we can do something in universities, of course, have to do with reintegrating universities in this continuum, right, of social practices, cultural practices that are the real tissue of social life, and we need to stop fitting this very conservative and violent perspective, understanding societies as a system which is apart, and that is allowing, let's say, for inequalities to grow and for the social system to reorganize. Because if you have an entry and an exit door, you can make it bigger or smaller. You can increase the fees or lower the fees. You can do one thing or another. You can have certain lifestyles that no not everyone can deal with. You can widening or narrowing the door, the entry door, but if you have a network of relationships, perhaps you will not have a door, but several interactions that will force you to carry out a permanent reciprocity exercise in the environment that you are part of. What is the role of universities as social actors? Well, they need to put knowledge at the disposal of society. That's why we call it a research center, right? And knowledge has to be disposable for society as a whole, and there can be no borders or door gated by a few in this battle for power. No, universities should have a community of open practices where qualitative and socially fair relationships are possible and experienced. And it seems difficult, but it's not. It's about the specific actions that has to do with how to get to university, how to reach university, how to share knowledge. I don't like the way of producing knowledge. I like generating knowledge, because culture is a generation. It's not a production. It's a cultivation of ourselves and of the life that we are ready to share. This is what universities are about. This is the reason of being of universities, if we understand universities as such and not as institutions for the reproduction of inequalities and for the class struggle, then this is another thing. So community of practices, reciprocity, and of course it's about daring, it's about accepting the consequences, the institutional consequences, because at the end of the day you might end up having to change many things that are somehow preserving the protected status quo of universities. I believe that when a system closes too much, it dies or tends to sterilization, and I believe we're getting to this point. So we have the desire and the challenge to open up. So being more, it's not so much about allowing others to access. No, we have to be part of the social tissue. We cannot be understood from outside. We are part, and there's an article that refers to a community of practices. Where do universities start and end? Perhaps it would be good not to know that, because our lives have no clear limits. Okay, the next segment will say, well, probably these didn't have the chance to go to university. See what happened with the way this planet evolved. The next clip is going to be an interesting one.
My God!
If you were the smartest person in the world...
This one's in your mouth. This one goes in your butt. Hang on a second. This one goes in your mouth.
And we're stuck with the dumbest people in history.
If you have one bucket that holds 2 gallons and another bucket that holds 5 gallons, how many buckets do you have?
2? What would you do?
Excuse me, I'm actually supposed to be getting out of prison.
You're in the wrong line.
I'm the smartest guy in the world? Says who?
The IQ test you took in prison. You got the highest score in history.
Even smarter than President Camacho.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of America! In the year 2505.
We got this guy. He's gonna fix everything. So you smart, huh?
The ordinary will be considered extraordinary.
I thought your head would be bigger.
Idiocracy.
Segurament, i esperem, estem davant d'una exageració.
So probably and hopefully this is an exaggeration, but we've heard concepts such as organized stupidity. This is something that could happen, right? If institutions for culture and knowledge are not where they should be. So my question now is for David. David, I would like to know the following. David, how is the teacher doing? How can we avoid an idiocracy? And how could we better knowledge? How could we better manage knowledge in today's world with the mass media and social networks? How can all this be integrated? How to integrate all these elements? Okay. I believe that many things need to be taken into account. Perhaps I have the feeling that I reiterate many times the same thing. Are we really? Well, I think it's very important to be clear of the fact that the only way to move forward is by accepting complexity. And I know that I'm using complexity too much, but I believe that this concept is key to understand where we need to be headed. We need to understand that we can't keep splitting knowledge in splits as it has been done for many years. These different silos have been deepened, worsened. Probably the origin of silos had a reason of being, right? Everyone works in specific areas to better focus in specific areas. So perhaps when it comes to moving forward in science and humanities, it might be useful, right? If you obsess in a gene or in an idea or in a technological solution, but without a broader context, without a broader integration in the social tissue, without better understanding social needs, without getting society involved, well, otherwise you are just randomized in your own little silo. So the only way not to fall into the trap has to do with paying attention to real needs, to real social needs, to ensure that the decision-making for us do not leave society behind, and accept what society needs and can contribute. 10 people think more than 5. And of course 17 billion people will think more than 10 people. So of course it's about being clear on all this. And even if, well, this of course worsens, silos are not positive. We have said that many times. We've been learning one from another for many years. We've learned a lot. And we all agree that the structure, the way it is organized today, now I'm speaking on my behalf, in the area of communication, of dissemination, of taking part of this report, much knowledge is not being considered because we are cornered. Disciplines have been cornered, and the only way sometimes to have a career has to do with maintaining your specialization, and no matter what you do outside, you're going to be cornered, and there's a big problem. And perhaps then we'll say, oh, we need more horizontal structures, we need more permeable universities, we need a better primary and secondary system, more horizontal systems. Rather, we are behaving the other way around. We are giving value to those professionals that are highly specialized, which is logic. It makes sense. We have our own personal ambitions, so depending on your ambition, you know where you will be stuck. Because if you get out of that path, you will end up losing track. And those who leave the system is because our ambition moves towards another side, or perhaps because we're satisfied with what we have achieved. So one of the ways to get to the target has to do with digging into this horizontality, the network. We are part of society. Universities are part of society. Okay, we need to close the debate. There will be one last open question for you all. There's a feeling of horizontality has been one of the key words, right? And at the end of the day, we aim at... Well, I have a last joint question for you all. So while institutions transform, what can us do? What real change can be put forward as a result of this meeting, of today's meeting, so that what we are discussing is a reality? Okay, let me share a couple of ideas with you here. It looks very nice, and of course universities in particular, but from different points of view. Well, you know, human beings are extremely clever when it comes to carrying out a diagnosis and saying, oh, this is wrong, this is not going well, and oftentimes we are stuck with such diagnoses. In my case, I try to be optimistic in life, and I believe that, and actually I really liked what you said. You said that 7 billion think better than 10 billion, right? Than 10, rather. So this is another debate. There's no time for this discussion, but our work has allowed us to open this debate, right? Democracy, governance, a definition of targets, assessment. I'm sharing a long list of things that, of course, would require broad debates, but of course we need to be clear of that. Ambition goes hand in hand with recognition and interacts with recognition. So you are happy through recognition. So getting hands-on, having specific proposals on the table would be interesting. Decision makers need support from the system. So we need to come up with the specific practices that break silos. Changing the educational system is urgent, but it will take time. And there's an important debate behind. But how can we ensure that some parts of the educational system become much more collaboration-based and transdisciplinary? Well, by opening up space. Today we have the living labs, for example. Outside the university, many things are going on in collaboration with universities. So universities contribute to many projects that are happening outside universities, and this is good. This is good. So why not enhancing at all possible levels structures that genuinely become transdisciplinary and that last for years, so that we build transdisciplinary citizens? It's not only about putting together a philologist and a telecommunications expert, just to give you an example. And this is possible, and our entities can achieve that if and only if they acknowledge the work of those who dare being part of such endeavors. Good. Thank you, David. Marina, would you like to add a final comment? Well, yes, what Giuseppe mentioned summarizes what we have been discussing, and that is explained in the report under each of the questions that the report is organized in. While we were drafting the report, when we thought, oh, okay, what is the relationship between humanities and other disciplines? Well, we have made a big mess, and that's the way it should be. But it can be proactive or not, right? You can be like naming and shaming the system and then doing nothing. And we came to the conclusion that we had to operate completely the different way around. We need to be as specific as possible. Of course, co-responsibility is key. Universities are education organizations, that include, of course, research, knowledge production, etc. But we educate. That's what we do. We need to criticize the existing knowledge. We need to educate our youth by reflecting about knowledge and lack of knowledge. So educational co-responsibility, and this, of course, has also a requirement of specific actions. Universities are cultural institutions. They produce culture. Culture doesn't happen only in theaters. It happens everywhere. Shared visions, that's culture also. So if universities end up understanding that they are part of today's time, a law will happen. It's not only about organizing concerts at night. It's about understanding universities as culture producers. And thirdly, we are a social institution, so we have a responsibility when it comes to inequalities, tackling inequalities, precarity within the system. We know it's a very precarious system, and this is the main problem that might end up killing universities. So the three layers are important. We are cultural, educational, and social. So a lot can be done in a voluntaristic way. We need to desire change. And right now, there are very important problems, and we need to perhaps, well, I have a question from humanities. All this stems, and our conclusion is that we are committed to keep working. If we believe in words, and I believe in words, I know that you can trick a lot with words, but that's why I believe in words. Well, narratives have to be coherent, and there needs to be consequences, and not self-legitimation moments, right? We need to take action. And thanks to Akub and GUNi, we'll keep working together, not to keep saying things, no, to implement them, to turn them into a reality. Thank you. Well, not like I can add much. I totally echo my colleagues' words. Perhaps I would add, not to insist on what already has been said, is, well, it's very good that we have change programs to change structures in depth radically. It has to be done, but we should never forget a quote. We need to think globally and act locally, of course. And that's the way it should be. We need to plan how we want the educational system to be, how we would like the relationship between science, technology, and humanities to look like, how we would like all this to be reshaped. But oftentimes, change is not going to stem from big reflections, but rather from our everyday life. What am I going to do as a, I don't know, math teacher? And Marina, what can she do to change? And Josep, and many of us work in research or in science and technology. So how can we change things? Because an addition of small changes enable a big change. Of course, we need to know what we want to change. But if we are waiting for the big change and then I will adapt, it will never happen. And if it happens, it will probably be a negative change. So we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of our own individual responsibility within a common project of transformation of the system towards a wider integration that fully integrates society. Okay, small, powerful little changes. There's a last change I would like to announce. Before it has been said, 10 people, 40 people can think much better, but 4,200 people can think much better. And the last question that I would like to share with you is going to be thrown to all of you. And here's a suggestion. It's a real-time experiment. I don't know if it's going to work. But if you could please download this application, slido.do, and please, can you access with this following code? Can you register with this code, GUNi, capital letters 2019? I don't know if we're going to be screening this. Yeah, it's going to work. Yeah, this is the application you need to download, and you need to register with this password, GUNi 2019. So we have put together one last question for you. We would like to know what from you. We would like to hear from you. What should universities grant? The possibility to find a job, to offer solutions to complex problems, to, well, a minimum of common culture, to avoid idiosyncrasy, to open gaps for professionals who want to enroll in academic careers. It's not an easy task. This has been said by Marina. It's not easy to work in universities today, especially as a youth. So what do you think universities should grant? You can take more than one option. Not like you only have to answer one. You can take all of them. You can take all of them if you wish. And perhaps with that, it seems like the first one is gaining importance. I know you tried to avoid, well, knowledge, yeah, knowledge seems to be also an important answer to all of you. Yep. And the less valued one has to do with sticking in university, of course, because if you open doors, it's not that important to stay in university, right? Those who think, those who have decision-making power, well, it is a way to understand where life is going to head towards. Perhaps if doors are open, you don't want to stay because you can go in and out. You can flow, so it's coherent with what we said, right? Good. So if you agree, you can keep voting, but we're going to leave it here. Probably the most burning topic has to do with overcoming complex challenges, so good. We're happy to hear that. And of course, universities should ensure a minimum knowledge in us all. So we are all important, we all have a part to play, and all disciplines have. Thank you very much to all of you. Yeah, thank you very much. And a big hand. And if you agree, we're going to move to the last segment of the of today's session. We're moving to the closing session. For that, I need to call the different speakers. And the first one will be Alfonso González Bondia, Director General of Mediterranean and European Affairs of the Catalan Government and Professor of the URV. Authorities, dear colleagues, speakers, hosts, dear friends, good morning, good afternoon. Today's session confirms what I've always thought. A professional with heart is a good professional, and hearts are filled in with humanities and many other knowledge. But basically humanities. I'd like to thank your invitation to participate in this public presentation of the 7th GUNi report entitled Humanities and Higher Education, Synergies between Science, Technology and Humanities. I would like to express my satisfaction for representing the Secretariat for European Affairs of the Catalan government. We are committed with the GUNi, and more importantly, we support the elaboration of this report. The Secretary for European Affairs and External Affairs has supported the GUNi reports for a long time now because we believe that they are important I have to say also that we are particularly interested in this year's edition and in the discussion that has been opened in this morning, because it responds to a growing concern in our society regarding the perception of an utility of humanities in today's world. There's no doubt that you might be asking yourselves why our Secretariat supports activities of this nature. As you might know, Catalonia is committed with the development of a fair global order, peaceful global order that, of course, goes hand in hand with a commitment towards multilateralism. We are convinced that today's global challenges cannot be overcome without a solid commitment with a multilateral, efficient, and inclusive system that includes the participation of different stakeholders at all levels. So, one of the priorities of the Catalan government has to do with enhancing the cooperation with multilateral relevant organizations for the country and enhancing the development and deployment of international programs in Barcelona. We support GUNi's task in the development of direct relationships both with UNESCO and the UN. As you might know, the UNESCO has a close relationship with Catalonia due to its mandate on high-stake matters for the country. The government promotes the participation and the contribution of civil society organizations in initiatives aiming at reshaping this global agenda, and the GUNi and its secretariat, through a COOP, reinforces this collaboration with multilateral organizations. Allow me to share a few reflections with you about one of the topics that have been dealt with this morning. Oftentimes, science and humanities have been presented as split one from another, but a rigorous analysis shows a different reality. The relationship between humanities and the economy, the importance of research in art, science, and literature, amongst other binomics, underline the proximity between both worlds. So we need to break the topic according to which humanities and science are opposed, and we need to bet for a mutual recognition based on the certainty that there's no research without interpretation, nor vice versa. So in scientific support and humanistic inspiration, the 7th Global Report on Higher Education concludes that humanities are not a list of disciplines to be preserved, but rather a list of essential disciplines upon which depends the capacity to give sense and value to the human experience in today's changing world. There's no doubt that humanism is the basic, both in terms of language and in terms of literature, dialogue, the promotion of democracy through art, and the stimulation of sensitivity. Today's reflections make me think about the UNESCO report 2015, Rethinking Education Towards a Global Common Good. And in this report, education is rethought, and there's a revisitation of one of the reports that have most widely impacted. The Delors report, the document, is based on the premise that the world is changing, and such changes are featured by different degrees of complexity and contradiction. So, education has to change alongside. The report is inspired by a humanistic approach of education based on respect for life and human dignity, equality, social justice, cultural diversity, international solidarity, and shared responsibilities towards a sustainable future. It also urges us to think about education as a common good, to rethink education as a joint collective venture in a global complex world. Yesterday, while reading the conclusions of the report, a personal anecdote came to my mind that I would like to share with you. 15 years ago, the URV, I'm a teacher there, I'm a professor there, there was a compulsory module for PhD students in the university. And in the module, I had the chance to lecture students for 3 hours, in which we reflected about the use of force and war in the international scenario. And I really had fun doing so, but I always had the feeling that I was entering hostile territory, because I had a colleague from, I don't know, I was there teaching people who were studying different things. A couple of years ago, I visited the city council where I live to overcome a little problem of a cultural entity, and I had an interview with a technician of the city council. And when I stepped in and we started talking about the license, etc., and all of a sudden she said, "Oh, you were my teacher once." And I was like, "Oh, really? So you studied law, right?" And she said, no, I didn't." And I was like, "Oh, really, didn't you? And what did you study?" "Engineering." And I was like, "And I was your teacher? How is that even possible?" She said, "Yes, in this module on citizenship that was compulsory for us all." And then I was like, "Oh, okay." And I was a little bit nervous. I thought, "Oh my gosh, I think she's going to hate me and now I'm not going to solve my problem." I was like, "And how was that?" And she told me it was very interesting. I still remember that. So the pilot experience, and I thought it was crappy, that was not very well welcomed by students 15 years after. A student still remembered it. So I believe this go down the line of the conclusions that are being pointed in this report. I would like to congratulate the promoters of the report for stemming this debate and discussion process in Catalonia, abroad, and between universities and the private sector, with the aim to reflect about the role of humanities in the 21st century and its interaction with knowledge, especially in higher education. It's a very timely report because we are living very deep changes in today's world with clear implications for the future that face us to big challenges, and it requires of new approaches both in society as a whole and everywhere. Knowledge society has no way to transform itself, and the best possible way is education. That's why we need to think big. I need to rethink education in a changing world, in a changing scenario. And of course, this topic will be discussed in the future because there are new narratives around education and culture. Thanks.
Moltes gràcies.
Thank you, Alfonso. And now we'll give the floor to Francesc Xavier Grau, Secretary of Universities and Research of the Catalan government. Hello and good afternoon. So I believe this has been a very interesting morning discussion. I am very satisfied to have had the chance to participate in this discussion and to be here in the closing session. I recalled, nonetheless, that 2.5 years ago we were in a similar situation. I was presenting the 6th report, and I was a director of the GUNi back then. So I know the house, I know the institution, and I know the work that is done here. So I can imagine how tired you are after 2 years of preparing this report. So congratulations. Congratulations for all the work. I would like to acknowledge the work of GUNi in the 20th anniversary. And I would like to congratulate on behalf of the Catalan government, the editorial committee, the 3 editors who had, well, who shared a debate with us, and the more than 130 authors of the report. I believe that today we have, well, in the short presentation that we have attended regarding the content of the report, and even more importantly in the discussion and in Rob Rayner's presentation, lecture, and in the panel discussion that we have enjoyed, well, there's no doubt that we are facing a complex yet interesting topic. Let me tell you a little bit more about why I say that. Well, but in any case, this report is extremely timely and necessary. Congratulations to GUNi for the topic they chose 2 years ago. I don't know what is the topic they're thinking about for the next report, but let me tell you, as Secretary General for Universities of the Catalan government, that you can count on our support, because you are precisely channeling the mandate that you came up with and that you shared with us before to put forward new proposals, new policies in higher education from a service-oriented perspective based on relevance and social responsibility. There's no doubt that you have achieved that. And I'm sure this will be the case in the future. So we'll be following you from close, and we'll be supporting you because you are part, well, we are the legislative power, right? And we are extremely interested in your proposals in the area of new policies in higher education. And now I take my government hat off, and I would like to participate a little bit more in the debate, in the discussion that you've had. Thanks for allowing me to do so. There's been a split between complexity and difficulty. I believe that. There's a third element. Complexity is growing. We are in a growing complexity scenario. So we are facing a temporal equation also. So the title of the report, Humanities and Higher Education, in the different presentations that we've heard this morning, the editorial members, well, they have made reference to the fact that the title probably should be Humanities and Education. We are facing a matter that does not affect only higher education, but rather education as a whole, the educational system as a whole. So if we only target higher education, we'll fail our mandate. Of course, it's relevant in higher education, but also before. Now to speak about complexity and growing complexity, let's define higher education. What is higher education? Today we've focused on universities, not only superior or higher education. You have focused on university education. And you have made the link between knowledge generation, research, and university. This is good. But higher education is much more than that. Perhaps 40 years ago, when we started our academic career, back then this was not considered higher education, but today, for example, vocational training is considered to be higher education because it targets professionalization, and it has to live together with another very much needed sector. And our guest speaker referred to the need to go back to liberal arts education. So there's one thing or another, and both can live together. And this complexity, I believe, has to be taken into account when we speak about this issue. Last week I was reading an article, on the role of humanities and the difficulty that humanities experience when it comes to answering to a dilemma that the author considered to be an internal debate within humanities on a concept which in English is called, yes, vocationalism. I don't know how that translates. Well, vocationalism, yeah, versus humanities, or more, let's say, closed humanities systems. So this is one dilemma that is clear, especially when we consider that behind higher education, well, part of our higher education system is vocational, and this is related to the employability, right, of candidates or students, and these elements need to be included in the public debate. We can speak only about university education, the academic and the liberal education. Yes, that's a very interesting debate, but it's a partial one. There's another segment that needs to be also taken into account. Perhaps in the past it wasn't considered to be part of higher education, but today it is. There's no doubt. vocational training is higher education, and that's why we need to consider also the needs of vocational training and how to make it compatible with university education. I would like to see the responses to the questions that have been asked before online, but most likely the most widely chosen answer has been asking or answering to complex social issues. So yes, we are facing a long-lasting debate. Now to conclude. While you were speaking, I was thinking about, well, I'm a lecturer in fluids mechanics and turbulence, and the complexity of turbulences hasn't been solved yet, so it's a very nice problem. So imagine that we have like a volcano erupting or the explosion of an atomic bomb. The growth of fungi, for example, also. So if we imagine knowledge as something that grows progressively, if it had a flat surface, if knowledge had a flat surface, but if the surface of the knowledge becomes more and more complex and it intermingles, imagine a volcano explosion, imagine that the smoke intermingles, so the surface ends up having more surface than the volume. So dealing with the surface of knowledge is demanding today, very demanding, very complex. Of course, we need to be there, but the surface is infinite. And that means that we need to also ensure hyper-specialization. And as a result of hyper-specialization, we might end up losing the base and being fluid. So probably the way to feed the bases is to go back to the origins, to back to the bases, as it has been said before. We need to reinforce humanistic knowledge throughout university. Trivium, as you said, Francesc, is precisely the same idea, right? So we are facing a matter that has to do with society and education, humanities and education. So we need to get hands-on and work at all different levels. And that's why we count on your work, GUNi. Today you have provided with a sample, you have fed us with very interesting discussions, and I hope that in the future you will be working down this path and will be there for you. Thank you. Thank you, Francesc, and thank you for this metaphor. Thanks for the image. Now we'll conclude with the presentation of José Manuel Pingarrón, Secretary General for Universities of the Government of Spain.
Everything. I'm very happy to be here on behalf of the Ministry of Science, Innovation and Universities to share with you this report that is very, very important. This is a very important report, and actually it's one of the main challenges in the European Union. So congratulate, GUNi, congratulate for this excellent report that we will read very carefully. And I'm going to switch to Spanish because I want to make some comments on the final remarks and so on.
So this fake dichotomy between universities, science and technology, and I say fake from the very first moment, well, it's been dealt with from the European level, at the European level. Probably you know missions, right? The missions that are about to be launched in the European Commission for the next period, 2021-2027. And in all the different missions, even if some of the missions have a very technical elements. There's one about cancer, for example, but in all of them, the role of social sciences and humanities is key. In other words, in this mission on cancer, the role of psychologists, of philosophers, of economists will play an important role, because there's something that cannot be neglected today, and the European Union has realized. This is part of European values. Beyond assessing the economic impact of things, we need to assess the social impact of things. Actually, in the last presentation in Brussels a month ago, a fourth mission was included. The three classical one: knowledge dissemination, knowledge production, and knowledge transfer. And this was under a very important umbrella, which is social service. And this is extremely important. So for social service to be granted and for social service to be ensured, the role of humanities, of social sciences, of arts, of legal sciences need to be combined with science and technology to go hand in hand and to develop the values that we want to achieve. In the Ministry for Science, Universities and Research, we need to we want to be on the ground, and we want to talk about the important synergies into symbols, and from our perspective are extremely important because they symbolize what we want to achieve. First, and probably you've heard about the transfer period. Actually, some colleagues refer to it as the technological period. No, and I keep telling them, no. One of the main reasons why we changed the name has to do with enlarging the concept of dissemination to areas that were not included in the past. We're not referring only to science and technology, but also about science transfer in social sciences, in humanities, in art, and in legal sciences. Good knowledge transfer, high quality and socially relevant knowledge transfer. And the second symbol, the second important thing, to call it some way, is yet to come. But we wanted, and I don't know if we'll have time or not, we wanted to change the name of the OTs and stop calling them OTs to start calling them OTCs, knowledge transfer units, because we want knowledge to be inclusive. We want everyone to fit. And not only that, but also we want to ensure that this is based on collaboration. And this is what has been said in today's panel. And for sure, the report will insist on this point. So yeah, we are facing complex problems, there's no doubt about that. And the solution to complex problems cannot be binary. Like, what do you want? A university where they train professionals or something else? No, it cannot be binary. Actually, when I attend meetings and presentations in more economic-oriented forums, let's say, one of the main questions that I'm asked is, what about universities? At the end of the day, they need to prepare good professionals for the future so they find good jobs. So employability is one of the key factors of higher education. And I always say yes, but not the only one. As it has been said very wisely this morning, there are other elements that need to be considered in higher education. We need to train critical citizens, cultivated citizens, citizens that are ready to ask themselves difficult questions. And this is how higher education should look like today. So, of course, we need sound answers, multidisciplinary answers to complex problems. And I'm going to conclude with this. The role of humanities, the role of art, the role of social sciences is key. And today, nothing makes sense, globally speaking, if it's not approached holistically. The same applies with what we call knowledge transfer, wrongly say or call or refer to as knowledge transfer. It's not like universities transfer knowledge to companies. No, we prefer circular research, cooperation-based research, so that we all set a common goal together. So it's not only about science or technology. No, it's about the fact that humanities and social sciences should play a key part in bringing together science, technology, and humanities. Thanks for the report from the ministry. We don't really know which one. We'll see how things work. We'll see how we get organized. But if we stay in office, count on our support. If we stay in office, count on our support. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now, well, we're running a little bit late, but before closing, we would like to thank all the sponsors and all of you. It's been quite a long session this morning. Thank you very much once again for being with us. Thanks to all who participated in the report. Thanks to the team. Thanks to the speakers. And hopefully the actions that we have listed this morning here will become a reality soon, and hopefully the role of universities will improve society as a whole and allow us to become more respectful with the environment, with the planet, research, richer also in humanities, and all of those who have burning questions. Perhaps you didn't have time to pose your question because we've had limited time. Well, now we have some time for a toast with a cava, with a glass of cava. And we'll hand over a copy of the report. So, make the most of this time to ask a question to the editorial team or whoever you wish. From our side, thank you very much. We will toast for knowledge and see you soon. Thanks.